And if you look at this, you see that in her left hand, she is holding broken chains. Now, this was found, let me see where we found it, in the basement of the Statue of Liberty, encased in glass, facing a wall, behind some figurines. So it was hidden in plain sight. And I felt some kind of way about it. I really did feel some kind of way. And by the way, the crown is never meant to be a crown. Everybody calls it a crown. It's actually supposed to be beams of light. It don't matter either way. But I'm saying, what's going on here? So let me tell you the story. This is Frederick Bartholdi, and he insisted that the chains remain. Bartholdi insisted. And the United States said no. Then Bartholdi said, I'm going to have to insist. He's a sculptor. He said, I have to insist. She is the Statue of Liberty. Those broken chains are about the freedom of black people from enslavement. She is the Statue of Liberty. The United States said no. So who won the argument? Bartholdi won. Statue has chains, broken shackles at her feet where it is impossible to see them under any circumstances. Always been there the whole time, and unless you have a zoom lens from a helicopter, you can't see it. I showed you the pedestal. But now I'm feeling some kind of way. But I'm thinking, Floyd just got the job. I don't want the brother to lose a job because this news at 11 with Dr. Joy. But Floyd, being who he is, said, go on and bring it, Joy, go on and bring it. So I'm trying to talk to now his boss, and I'm saying, let me explain what happens at the Statue of Liberty. Now, we're talking about healing, right? I want to talk to you a little bit about what people do and say when they come through the Statue of Liberty. Oh, my great-great, we came through Ellis Island, Mayflower, This is white people talking about Statue of Liberty. But black men, women, and children walk through and feel no connection to Lady Liberty. But how much taller would our young people stand if they knew she was standing on the chains that their ancestors came in the belly of ships? How much prouder would they be about those who paid for them to be here? When you erase the chains, you erase me, and I feel some kind of way about that. So I spoke with his boss. His boss goes, yeah, no. I said, well, let me say something to you. I said, this is what I'm willing to do. I'm willing to pay. I will pay to have a picture put on display of the chains, just of the chains, because you show me everything. You tell me how thick it is. You tell me the first rendering of the head and the torch. I said, I will pay for it to be put on display, just the chains. And he said, no. I said, tell you what I'll do. I'll go across to New York because I know there's some brothers there that can sculpt, and they can just sculpt just that piece like you have all the pieces of the Statue of Liberty and put that on display. And he said, no. I said, all right then. I'm going to tell on you. So everywhere I went, I don't even care what it could have been about breastfeeding. I brought this up. I told everywhere, every country I was in, I told everybody, and I get a call from the Department of the Interior. But I ain't scared because I'm from South Central. I said, all right, go on and bring it. Go on and bring it. So they called me and said, Dr. DeGruy, first of all, we want to apologize because, they're good at that. There was some regret. A little bit of regret. We heard about regret. So he said, we want to correct this, first of all. We've been negligent, and we'd like you to come. We want to hire you to come and train all the Rangers at the Statue of Liberty. I said, all right, then. I still don't trust him now. Don't get it twisted. I don't trust him. So I flew to the Statue of Liberty, trained all the Rangers, and that picture suddenly appeared on display at the Statue of Liberty. Now, and this is what and this was alluded to by several other folks. There's a lot of symbolism and stuff that people do. They take Aunt Jemima down, Uncle Ben. They taking down flags and such. So that didn't mean anything to me because there was not an explanation of the chains. It was just a picture, and I felt some kind of way about that. So then I said, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back undercover. So I went back in 2013 undercover, and I wanted to figure out, one, were they explaining it? And two, was the ranger going to share it with me unasked? Okay. You got to keep it real. So the first thing I noticed, this is the second visit, it's displayed, the picture's displayed for everybody to see. The Statue of Liberty holding, I said, that's a good look right there, okay. And there is me and Ranger Slacker. That's really his name. I kid you not. And Ranger Slacker told me the story of the Statue of Liberty unasked. Turned to me and said, this is my history, it is your history, it is our history. And I'm proud to tell it. So I'm thinking, job well done, good done, I'm out. Because I was tired at this point, right? The man kept his job and everything. So something rather miraculous happened. In 2019, now there is a new museum there. Wasn't there in 2008? Statue of Liberty was created to celebrate freed slaves, not immigrants. Its new museum recounts. Lady Liberty was inspired by the end of the Civil War and emancipation. Connection to immigration came later. Lady Liberty was originally designed to celebrate the end of slavery, not the arrival of immigrants. Ellis Island, the inspection station to which millions of immigrants passed, didn't open until 6 years after the statue was unveiled in 1886. And the plaque with the famous Emma Lazarus poem, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free," was not added until 1903. Let's unpack this. Do you think they didn't always know that? Do you think I believe that Dr. Joy unearthed some truth? They have always known, lied about it from the beginning, but until you start digging, they're not going to change it. Are you following me? This is why we got to show up in these spaces that are annoying, toxic, so we keep them accountable. Does that make sense? And so what I'm realizing is that through that whole effort, years in the making for me to get to that point, they always knew. And now I guess they suggest it was their original idea to do this. That doesn't matter because I don't need the credit for it. But what's important is that we tell the truth. Because again, we can't heal without truth. It goes to show you can make some things happen. We know we had a trail of tears with our indigenous brothers and sisters. But we didn't know that indigenous people were not the only victims of white supremacy. When I first saw this photo, I didn't even know what it was. There are, if you look behind it, you can't see it, but as far as the eye can see, there are skulls. Those are buffalo skulls. And the idea of the United States government is we're going to steal their land, can't seem to get them away from it though, so we're going to starve them by killing every single buffalo. Stay with me. Stay with me on this. Now, let me tell you something in the United States. Right now, those of you that don't live in the United States, it's a good time to be a dog or a cat, isn't it? Oh, Lord, it's a good time to be a dog. You got gourmet food. You got protections that people don't have. If some little puppy ran up and I was in the United States and I took and wrapped something around his neck and choked it to death, I'd be arrested faster than if it was a black man on the other side. That's how important animals are. Is it animal tested? I mean, it's insane. Millions. And guess what they told us? You know, because of overhunting of the buffalo, they've become an endangered species. Now, if you don't know any better, who hunts buffalo? Well, it must be those indigenous people that killed them, right? We know they're the ones that hunt the buffalo. Are you hearing me? It was a policy of the country to kill them all. And I'll go to jail right now if I just look side-eyed at a cat. So how do you reconcile the dissonance here? And again, it even gets worse than that. We got people, they would have cut down every redwood. I don't know if anybody has been in the redwood forest, but let me tell you, it is a spiritually humbling experience to be among those trees, those giants. if they could speak to us, they would have cut down, stay with me, every single one of them were it not for a spotted owl. I'm just trying to say, there are a lot of victims of this. So this is leaning deeply in to what our other speakers have been saying, and that panel, and of course, Sister Nicole. We can't start celebrating too much when we see folks taking down these symbolic things. And I want to unpack this one for a moment because I've been tracking this for years. And I work with the indigenous community because my family is United Nations Trust. We got everybody in my family. And we have indigenous people in the family. Not only that, I've been doing work for at least 20 years in the community when asked. I don't, try to, like the white people, braid their hair and buy some turquoise and become suddenly Indian. But I'm just saying, it happens all the time. And you got black folks. How many people met black people that say they're not black? Did I mention how much Indian I have in me? We just want to be at that. That's post-traumatic. That's a little later. Okay. So when we start looking at those gestures, for example, did you say, is that a sign? That's a sign you're showing me? It's not, that can't be true. Is that true? Am I reading it right? 10 minutes. Okay. 10 minutes. I haven't even gotten into it. That's my fault, though. I just got to, what can we do? Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to finish this up. Because, see, what happens after this? What's happening? I just want to know so I can see what to do.
We can wrap up, but now we can take a break.
We're going to take a break?
Then we come to the next panel.
The next panel. Next panel's waiting. So we got a break. We have to have a break.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that wouldn't be fair to other people. Okay, so let me get you. We're using up my 10 minutes. Okay, so I'm going to finish up. But you see, I can't get to the healing. I have a whole healing component. But I can't get to it, right? Because we're trying to understand the nature of the injury. So there's two things I want to say about those folks when we start talking about advocacy and reconciliation. You all remember that sister that climbed up that pole and took the flag down? Okay, first of all, she did an interview and she talked about how long she practiced, because you can't just go up a pole, right? So she practiced, and there were a whole series of people that were part of that process. There was a diverse group of people, not just black people. There was a group of folks that planned. They had an attorney present because they knew she was going to be arrested. They had worked out everything except one thing. And this is for those who want to be, allies and advocates and such. They didn't work out how those police were going to try to get her down. And the police had decided that they were going to tase the pole. The police were showing up, they were grouped together, and they decided they were going to electrify the pole to bring her down. And the little attorney who was standing there waiting for her to come down and to be arrested, he was the only one that was there, and he hugged the pole. He instantly just hugged the pole. He said, if they're going to take her down, they're going to take me down. Unwilling to tase a white man, they were not able to get to the pole. Hug the pole if you want to be with us. Hug the pole. Hug the pole. So I'm going to unpack this, and then I'm going to have to wrap up. I am so sorry. There's absolutely no way to do it quickly. This was 2017. In 2017, Ottawa, Canada apologized to First Nations people because of their boarding school policies where the children were physically abused by priests, nuns, and ministers. They also gave them $750 million to redress it. And this is where we got to start doing the deep dive, because see, when they start offering that, they don't want you to do the deep dive. Are you hearing me? Because $750 million for genocide, for rape and pillage, I'm sorry. And probably indigenous people laughed at that. And this was their way, we're going to apologize. We have regret. And we'll give you some ducats too. But this is what they were hiding. This emerged in 2021. New York Times, horrible history, mass grave of 215 15 indigenous children reported in Canada. In those same spaces, they had mass graves of dead children. That's what they didn't want you to see. That's what they didn't want you to see. Just like they'll give you the statue down, they'll give you all that. But, it's like when Thomas Jefferson, when they found out that Sally Hemings, everybody black knew, but Sally Hemings was the heir to Thomas Jefferson, and they made it all about being buried at Monticello. That whole thing? It didn't have nothing to do with where you get buried. It was rights of inheritance. But we got lost in, they just want to be buried there. No, I want the money. Right? That's what they didn't want you to go to. But we get, as smoke and mirrors, we get so excited because somebody apologizes. And I'm just saying, we all have to do the deep dive, right? And so for me, I think, I'll close out with so many things I wanted to tell you and wanted to say. But here's what I would say, is that, we are all in this together. None of us have arrived. We just all agreed to take the trip. And we're all on that trip. But we got to be relentless, right? And I said it to my group, to remember who we are and to recognize whose we are. And I think it was said best in The Color Purple. Suge and Celia are walking through a field of purple. And Suge turns and says, I think it pisses God off to walk through a field of purple and not notice it. Everything just want to be loved. Everything just want to be loved. Thank you so much.
I think Dr. Joy deserves a loud applause than that.
Yeah, we want to create a space tomorrow. We will call it, it's a healing circle. We're hoping that you can have the PowerPoint, but they may not be, it's an open space where we can sit in a circle, but we'll try. If we're able to get the PowerPoint, it'll be okay. But if we don't, let's prepare. In Africa, we never say plan B. I don't know, because our plans are continuous. There's no A, B, C, D. You can't liberate a continent with plan A, B, C. And I know that the same is in the struggles that you were describing. This session is, fortunately or unfortunately, is not going to be for the hour that it was scheduled. It's going to be for 45 minutes. And I see your looks of approval. I know you have forgiven me in advance, right? I'm going to, just to explain to our colleagues, I'm just going to give you about 5 minutes each to frame, and I'm going to make a request which is stupid, but then again, I am stupid. And if you give a person who's as stupid as I am a mic, you are under the tyranny of stupidity. So my request is that if something has already been said, I know that emphasis is good. It may just be useful so that we get to the discussion just to reference, not necessarily repeat. Then the second, I'd like you to leave a moment for discussion, if you can. So we will take about 3 to 5 minutes for your framing, which is 15 minutes. Then we will go first for comments, the audience or the participants. My brothers and sisters, I'm going to ask you, in the name of all our comrades, our ancestors, please, I know that you are so endued and endowed with intense wisdom. But I'm going to request that as you make your intervention, please save some wisdom for dinner. Don't take all of it and take the time, because the time is limited. So I'm just going to say, if you're making a comment, please don't also give us a biography, of where you've been involved in what struggles in this room. If we did that, we would have a problem with Dr. Garvey, Professor Campbell, Professor Beckles, and others, because we would be here. In the light of that, I'll tell you one little story and we get into the session. So there was a sophomores' dinner at Yale University, and they invited a chap who's as talkative as I am to give a speech. The gentleman decided to use the letters of the university, Y-A-L-E, as the basis of his speech. And they said Y for youthfulness, A for attitude, L for whatever, E for excellence. And at the end of his speech, there was a lady sitting at the back who said, "Thank God he's not from the University of Massachusetts." So we're going to start this, and so that we are clear. I have an eminent panel. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself in 1 minute, and then what we will do, Professor Peju, we will start with you, then go to Babatunde, and then we'll end with Nana, who's been. So, Prof, introduce yourself, short, get into your points. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peju Laiwola. I'm an art historian and also an artist from the University of Lagos. And I'll be talking about my intervention in the clamor for the return of Benin bronzes, which I started in 2003 through some personal intervention projects and solo exhibitions I had in Nigeria in 2010, titled Benin 1897.com, Art and the Restitution Question. And this was the first exhibition in Nigeria that focused on this British Benin encounter that occurred in 1897. And so I have some slides which I showed here, and these are the works. What are Benin bronzes? When we talk about Benin bronzes, we refer to a large range of objects that were taken away from the palace of the King of Benin in 1897 by British soldiers, and they are in a variety of media, not just brass, but also in ivory, in wood, terracotta, leather, iron, and sometimes you find one object having up to 7 materials, made of 7 materials, or even more. And these works were violently removed from the city of Benin. The king was exiled to Calabar, and we have about between 3,000 to 4,000 works were taken away from the palace in a very violent encounter. So these are samples of works which I took from one of the museums in Europe. And yes, images that are very familiar. The British soldiers sitting in the courtyard of the palace of the king with the plaques. Many of them are kept in the British Museum today. And the image of Oba Ovorame was exiled to Calabar, where he died in 1914. So the next slide shows my intervention, where I created about 1,000 heads in a ratio 1:4, exhibited in 2010, made of terracotta, not the valuable material that was removed, and the book, the accompanying catalog, which was published also in 2010, showing the appendices. In the appendices, you have a lot of letters that were written to museums requesting for the Benin objects from the royal family of Benin, and also some of the government officials in government institutions in Nigeria. So for me, it was important to get people, Africans, to speak about the story and to also express themselves the way they felt. Too often, we get written about from the outside. And some of the images here show the return of 2 objects that were in the UK, one in the Jesus College in Cambridge and the other in the University of Aberdeen. And these are images from the Palace of the King. Early this year, when they were returned, there was a lot of celebration for the return of these works. And some other images that show the celebration that went on in the palace, and those are the works that you find on the screen. And so sometimes we also think that the clamor for the return of objects or sacred relics from Europe and America have been something that has been done in Europe. But I would say that we missed the point. I know that President Macron made a statement in 2017, and in 2018 we had Benedict Savoy and Felvine Sars report on restitution, but we'll say that a lot of these requests had gone on the continent from the 1970s, perhaps even earlier. And one of the requests was done by His Royal Majesty Oba Akenzo II in 1935. He requested for 2 stools that were in the Berlin Museum, and these were brass stools, which were very vital to rituals in the palace, but he got replicas, which he paid for 4 years later. And the Germans said it was too culturally significant to return to the king. So we have a photograph here of Dr. Adrian Walker, who returned on his own volition 2 objects he inherited from his grandfather. His grandfather had been a spy attached to the expeditionary forces that attacked Benin in 1897. So he returned his works, 2 of them in 2014, to the king in the palace where his grandfather had violated. So we are also aware of the signing of the declaration between German and Nigerian government when the expedition occurred. Nigeria was not a nation state, but here we have the bilateral agreement signed between 2 countries for the return of Benin bronzes to Nigeria. And we also have, with all of this happening, I mean, this is the most important topic discussed today, the issue of restitution. We find that a lot of Africans are beginning to get much bolder in requesting for their objects. And this is a photograph of the Faun of Fontem from Cameroon, who visited with a lot of other royals to a museum in Cologne requesting for a very significant ancestral figure, the Bagua figure that has been in Germany for over 100 years. So one of my interventions is at the museum, the Rattenstraat Youth Museum in Cologne, which is actually shown at the moment, titled I Miss You. And in this exhibition, we have 96 works that were taken directly from the expedition, and only 3 of those works had been shown to the public, to the German public, for several decades. And here we have the works in the storage containers. They were brought out for the first time, shown to the German public, and these are the storage cases. And so I Miss You talks about what people miss in terms of the artifacts being trapped in foreign lands. And, so the other slide shows me with the director of the museum. Well, maybe I should just show the last slide. I don't know what's happening here. The last slide shows an intervention in trying to take off the ascension marks. Yesterday we went to the slave forts and we saw that there was a reference to the branding, stamping of names, numbers on the bodies of our brothers and sisters. And in this short video, I tried to symbolically take away the ascension marks, the inventory marks that the museums have put on this object. We do not put numbers on ancestors. And so this is likened to what happened to the slaves, in quotes. And so what I have here is a short video that takes away these marks in preparing these works to return to Nigeria. So I'm just going to show this very briefly. Yeah, it's a very short video. Taking off those marks, sometimes is a way of actually, it's a very violent encounter with the works themselves. You can find small pieces of Benin objects with very large numbers on them. Sometimes one object might have about 3 or 4 numbers. Talking about the trade, how the works are moved from one place to the other or one owner to the other. So I'm going to stop at this point and then hand over to the next person. Thank you very much.
Well, to save time, the slide is getting set. My name is Babatunde Adebiyi. I'm the legal advisor and director of legal services of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments of Nigeria. I coordinate the repatriation effort of Nigerian government. On this note, I think first I would like to thank the organizers of this event This is very helpful to Africa. Then, what we do in the National Commission for Museums and Monuments, I should say what we ought to be doing is getting back the antiquities, the Nigerian antiquities, and by extension, maybe joining hands with other African nations to get back the antiquities. Now, the discussions, at least from my end for today, will depart a bit from the topic being addressed here. We are talking of reparation. I'm talking about repatriation. Repatriation of antiquities now, because we see it as not just, we see it as an economic opportunity for Africa, and that is the way we are tapping into it in Nigeria. Later, I will explain what I mean by this. Reparation, I think, will be a wider idea, a wider concept. Repatriation is limited to getting these things back. We have been, I don't want to use the expression, queried. I work with the government, I say things a bit from the government perspective. But I've been regarded by the same government and people that work in government as an activist in government. I will explain this with the slides. We see it as an opportunity for Africa to raise funds, to tap into these resources, which, I would like to just tell you that 90% of African antiquities are actually in vaults, storage, not exhibited. They are assets to those nations. We are bringing them back to turn them to opportunities for Africans to raise funds and then to glorify in their past. After saying that, I must acknowledge the efforts of people that are not in government that worked towards achieving what we are currently achieving. And on this note, I want to cite the name Dr. Kwame Opoku, who is from Ghana here. He influenced me and is listening today. I thank him for what he did. Professor Peju, I thank you, and I thank several others, Nigerians, Africans in the diaspora. They worked hard, and well, nobody listened for a long time. When I joined the government, I think 2008, I was surprised that nobody was working towards this direction. Probably one or two persons might have read a book, Legal and Other Issues in Repatriating Nigerian Antiquities, which I wrote in 2009. This prompted, and I hope the slide is now working. It's not working yet, okay, because now I would have to, I should be discussing, okay? So we can be moving so that I can save time. So that is the title. So, you know, art, when a nation produces art or a people produce art, it is a representation of their feelings, of what they want to keep in perpetuity. We produced our art for that purpose, certainly for ritual purposes as well. These things have been stolen, taken away. Aren't these beautiful? These are Nigerian contributions to world art. These are some of them. There are even more exquisite ones. These are things stolen, and we are being told that we can't get them back. We are already getting them back now. This is the man that stole most of Ife bronzes, and his only excuse was that Nigeria did not have a law against doing this. Mind you, Nigeria was not yet a nation then, but Ife people couldn't have had laws that would say, don't take our antiquities away. I was in the British Museum, and somebody was explaining to me that some of these things were bought. How could you buy from an indigenous person of that era an Ife bronze at £1? A certain couple bought an Ife bronze at £1. And then when he brought them to Europe, Germany in particular, they didn't believe that these things could have emanated from Nigeria or from what later became Nigeria, because they thought we were not capable mentally of producing such things. Well, Peju has spoken about this, so I will go. How they left, I will just leave these topics. But they were stolen. I mean, there's certain efforts by certain leaders, and we must acknowledge this today as we are acknowledging Dr. Okpoko and the rest. He changed the perspective of Nigerians about this. So, and since then, we've been working in his stead. Then, of course, Mbo from Senegal, we are lucky that he was the Director General of UNESCO. He spoke fervently for repatriation. Of course, he was hated for this. Then, Ekpo, who was Director General of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments, wrote extensively about repatriation, but later people abandoned all what he stood for. Well, I was lucky, after writing the book I told you about in 2009, that the Nigerian government sent me to Egypt for this conference. And I think this was the turning point. I thank the Nigerian government for the opportunity. Since then, we've been struggling. Now, with the opportunity that the Nigerian government offered me, I came back and I wrote to the museum in Austria. We had an arrangement with the museum in Austria, now called Welt Museum. So I seized the opportunity and I wrote to them. Surprisingly, they came because they too felt that we should start discussing about the issue of what to do with the antiquities. The title they gave this was, sincerely, today, everybody here would be offended. As a matter of fact, at the Austrian embassy to secure a visa, the Nigerian official there was saying, how could you permit this kind of title? We told him, wait, when we get there, this thing will change. Well, it has changed today. It was supposed to be sharing. And I will tell you, you can't be sharing what is yours, intrinsically yours, and somebody is telling you to share. So, then upon meeting at Austria, Vienna, that was the first meeting of what later became known. Then it was not called the Benin Dialogue Group, but worldwide now it is called Benin Dialogue Group. Down there, on one side, you will see Dr. Kwame Opoku from Ghana here, who resides in Europe, particularly in Vienna. He, as an African, wanted to be part of that meeting, but he was shooed off. I can't think of another expression to explain this. It was not permitted. Of course, it wouldn't cause a scene there. He left. May his soul rest in peace. That is Professor Shillon. He was permitted in the meeting. He had another view about this. It was more collegial about discussions about this, and it was something that the Europeans seemed to welcome. Whoever knows Dr. Opoku here will know that he's vociferous in demand. And Europe will never welcome somebody that really wants to demand for their rights. So it was not permitted to be part of the meeting. Then subsequent meetings, but this is the outcome of the first meeting. Something I noticed was that other European nations now sought to be part of this discussion because, of course, we were not fighting, we were only demanding. And, well, that is just the only way you can go sometimes. Compromising, knowing that this is what is yours, but you don't have the weapon, you don't have the force to claim it. Then you have to be drawing them nearer. Several nations started joining. We started with about 5 nations, if I can remember. Later, other nations in Europe said, oh, these people are not fighting in that sense, so they chose to join. It started now, it was not called Benin Dialogue Group yet, like I said. Then we had a second meeting. Berlin chose to host us. That was Berlin. The second meeting was in Berlin. That was in 2011. And then, part of compromise was that they said we should at least know what each museum had in their vaults, or rather in their exhibition. We insisted to know what was in the vaults as well. We compromised and it was welcome. At the end of the day, we were not fighting yet, but we were getting results. And they promised scholarships for Africans. We welcomed that too, but we knew what our aim was. So this is the outcome of the second meeting. Then we lured them, let me use the expression lured now, the word lured, to Benin City. Now, I thank my brothers and sisters from the diaspora that are here today. Many would not want to come to Africa, but we convinced them. And convincing them was even more difficult than the discussions itself, but they came. And we chose the city of Benin City. And it was so auspicious that 3 minutes? Okay, let me just rush things. Because so many things to say, but they came and then things started moving. The press in Nigeria and Africa in general criticized us because they didn't know what we were working towards. If you don't have the weapon, like I said, you just have to use tricks. Then the third meeting, and this was the outcome of the third meeting. Then there was a lull in discussions because we seemed to be overwhelming. We wrote a letter to resuscitate the efforts. Luckily, there was an agitation going on in Cambridge University then. So this helped the opportunity of having the meeting in University of Cambridge. Then outcome of the fourth meeting, and then there was a fifth meeting, I think it was in Leiden. Then the sixth meeting, I think we heard it in Benin City now again. Whichever way, things are changing for the better. To tell you that we are not sleeping, we are working hard. We need support from everybody because we are working towards the same direction. These are art. It's like, a Picasso piece or a Michelangelo work found in Africa, and we want to forcefully retain it here. It won't work. It's a source of commerce as well to them, so it should be a source of commerce to us here in another form. Where we have passed this stage now, I think this was signing in Cambridge, the return of the Okuko back to Nigeria. This was one of their first achievements. And then I must commend who is watching as well now, Sonita Allen. That's what we call the director of Jesus College in Cambridge. She has linked in to what is on the screen there when I came in here. These are people that are committed to the African Renaissance. So this is the signing in Aberdeen to return a Benin bronze. Many success stories. This was with the customs in the Netherlands, fighting to get back that 600 years old Ife terracotta. Several success stories, and this is not, maybe the press will mention them because this is not the opportunity. I don't have the opportunity of mentioning them, but these are great success stories.
Okay.
Our desire is for you all to join us. Thank you.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thank you so much, Babatunde. Thank you so much, Pedro. I'm going to just ask the two of you to note 2 questions. But before you note the questions, I am disturbed by the use of 2 words, as you know, Tunde, from our Kigali discussions. Artifact is defined as an object made by a human being, typically one of cultural or historical interest. Something observed in scientific investigation or experiment that's not naturally present, but occurs as a result of preparative investigative procedure. Antiquity, the ancient past, especially the period of classical and other human civilizations before the Middle Ages. Right? And then my understanding of the Benin bronze, if they are anything similar to the empire which I am part of, the Great Zimbabwe Empire, is that many pieces were commissioned in Benin, specifically for the ancestral altars of past Obas and Queen Mothers. They were also used in other rituals to honor the ancestors and to validate the accession of new Oba. If you take the altar to the hand, Ike Gobo, the late 18th century Nigeria court of Benin, Edo people's bronze. In the royal kingdom of Benin, cylindrical altars to the hand, or ikegobo, are created to celebrate a person's accomplishments. So these are objects of worship. Then the 20th century, it's for those of you who followed Christian thinking, it's like going to Israel and taking the Ark of the Covenant, or going to take the ancient script. You will get my silly question just now. The 20th century and the documentation we have suggests that auction pieces for Benin bronzes started at around 5,500 British pounds in the 1950s. That this would be equivalent to about 210,000 US dollars today per piece. That some of these figures climbed steadily through the 20th century, so that in 2007, somebody called Sotheby sold a Benin head sculpture for $4.7 million. Now, is the term, just please hold on, Peju and Babatunde, arts and artifacts appropriate for referring to someone's gods? Are we requesting the return? I know people have become Christians and Muslims, but are we, I don't want you to answer now, I just want you to stew on it. There's the pragmatic position, but is there a politics to how you name what was stolen? In light of what Dr. Joy was saying earlier on. When you steal a person's gods and you give them your God, is the God stolen an artifact? I'll leave it at that. What is happening at the AU level? Where are we? What are the frameworks? Yeah.
Thank you. So by way of introduction, my name is Nana Osei. I think the audience has...
Yesterday there was a complaint in your absence. You see that lady sitting at the back there? She said you were using your romantic voice. They couldn't hear you. So today you are going to speak up since I'm your elder brother. Yeah.
I'm sorry. My name is Nana Osei. I'm the head of programs at the African Union Economic, Social and Cultural Council. So the right organ to be involved in this discussion. I'm very happy to be on the same stage as colleagues who are working more or less at the front, on the front lines of this discussion. At the level of the African Union, I think it's one of the areas where we can already see a lot of progress being recorded. Indeed, for those that follow the themes of the year of the African Union, last year, 2021, was specifically dedicated to the year of African arts, culture, and heritage. And there was a fully fleshed out implementation plan, a core component of which was on the issue of restitution of cultural artifacts. In fact, this issue has received enough policy and political attention at the level of the AU that there is an ongoing effort to develop a common African position on restitution of heritage resources. So this is something that is ongoing. There are other elements to the debate. In fact, there is an expanding policy framework at the level of the AU. In 2006, we passed the Charter for African Cultural Renaissance. That was followed by the African Union Model Law on the Protection of Cultural Property and Heritage, which was just promulgated in 2022. And even at the regional level, you're beginning to see some of our regional economic communities like ECOWAS, which came out with a regional action plan for the return of the cultural property to their countries of origin. And the AU is supporting this work. I think just in general, there are maybe a number of principles that guide the way that the AU approaches this. One of them has been referred to multiple times by my senior colleague from Nigeria, which is the economic angle, because it's not only the stealing of our heritage, but that heritage is also tied to economic value. And so when you steal these things and you take it away from the continent, and then you create an economy around it, that economy has been lost to us. And so yes, we need it to be returned to us, so that it sort of resides where it should be historically, culturally, spiritually, and everything, but also to then generate the kind of economic activity around it, which we need also, because we have a cultural and creative industry on this continent, and this can be the centerpiece of that. So that's one of the principles. The second principle is that these stolen resources were taken in circumstances that were dehumanizing. There were military parties that were forcibly taken, and sometimes this was accompanied by loss of life of the original owners of this property. And therefore, it's not only a matter of returning and restituting, but also to make sure that we are honoring the people who originally owned these resources. And then thirdly, we are also aware that when these resources are stolen and kept out of their spiritual home, they are subject to misinterpretation, they are subject to misrepresentation of their purpose, they are sometimes mistreated, sometimes just because there's not enough information as to the original intent or purpose of their creation. Sometimes they are willfully subjected to, for the lack of a better word, propaganda, in an effort to discredit their worth and their value. And so we need to also take that back, and bring it back to where we can properly appreciate them in the spirit within which they were created. And lastly also, we are now as a continent beginning to establish the structures that we are going to need to be able to govern, these resources when they come back. We are in the process of establishing the Great Museum of Africa, which will be in Algeria, which is supposed to be the continental museum that will work with colleagues like my senior colleague from Nigeria and all the national museums to make sure that this heritage, when it comes back to Africa, is able to be managed and administered properly. There is a number of priorities that are being worked on, but I think I can go into that in the Q&A. Thank you.
My brother Nana, I'm going to ask you a very simple question. I asked Pedro and Tunde. Dr. Ron, you're going to help Nana answer this question. And I will say, if someone comes to take your cell phone and kills you in the process, what is that act called at law? Nana gave us a very nice diplomatic term. He said some of these things were taken in circumstances in which the original owner lost their life. So I would like to know what at law, because we're talking about legal obligation. You are the lawyer, say, right? What do you call an action in which a third party, an intruder, kills you for what you own and takes it away? Yeah, no, Dr. Ron will help you in case you, yeah, okay. No, maybe you want to think about it some? You are the lawyer. What is it called?
Yeah, you see, I'm a government lawyer. So he's a diplomat, I'm a government lawyer. I should be circumspect about use of words now. But in strict terms, it was stealing, it was annihilation. So annoyed that even getting the word out is a bit difficult.
No, yeah, I don't want you to go to the old one.
Okay.
I just want you to, as a lawyer, I have my brother Godwin there. He may not be a lawyer. I just want you to describe for non-lawyers in the room. At law, we are forgetting what you do for a job. At law, let's say in Ikeja, somebody who looks like me comes with a gun, says, give me your cell phone and your wallet, and you say no, and they bundle you in the car, drive you away, shoot you, and take your things. When we catch those people, what at law do we charge them with? I just want people to know the legal term of that action. Yeah, that one. That's just the thing.
We have argued this out. We have told them that you stole these objects, return them. Now, there's a definition in law, apart from the annihilation, the forceful removal, there's a definition in law. Stealing is the taking of something that does not belong to you with the intention of retaining it and not giving it back.
Okay.
So, once they insist that they are not giving it back, they remain thieves of the properties.
Yeah, okay. So we'll come back to that. What happens when a thief also kills the owner? What is it at law? All right, so let's hear from the rest of you. Sorry? No, we're coming. Can we get a mic? And please raise your hands for interventions. And remember, my request is please just take less than a minute, yes, so that I can take 10 people at least. Yeah.
Yes, just quickly, I'm very passionate about this return of artifacts, looted artifacts from Europe. But as Africans trying to get back our heritage, as damaged as it was and it is, we must avoid Eurocentric categorization. I keep saying we beg, we plead. I think that puts us in a paradigm of begging for what is ours. What I will expect to hear from the AU, and I've spoken with the DG of the National Commission for Museums and Monuments, is to incorporate other African countries into a program plan of action. Go with this exhibition around African countries and Africans in different parts of the world, and those European countries that have returned our artifacts, we thank them in their countries and let their people know that the individuals still holding these things must return them to the source. Secondly, most important is to have an educational platform where the community will house these things, because the fear is when you now go and give it to the new nation states, Benin Kingdom for instance, when they stole these things there was no Nigeria. So if you bring it back, let it go to the autochthonous communities and make it a community museum. So you return that heritage to the people. Imagine the intellectual property of the people lost for centuries. So I think we have to be a bit militant about this at the AU level and at the regional levels. Let Nigeria, that is more powerful in terms of lobby, incorporate other African countries so that we fight together to return these things.
Anybody else wants to comment? We've got hands. So we've got Brother John, we've got Professor, we've got somebody, sorry, my brother, just finish that table, let the lady speak, and then you come to the sister there.
Sorry.
Thank you. My take on this is that when we speak about reparations, and we should be speaking about reparations for the return of African artifacts, and when we speak from a reparations perspective, we are also looking at some of the income that was gained by European countries in the museums where the artifacts were being exhibited. We have received the artifacts with the moral value or with the original value of the artifacts to us, but they have been gaining income where they were over the centuries. And we need to have a broader discussion about also the sending back or the restitution of the income that it has gained. In the African culture, if you steal my goat, my female goat, and it gives birth to kids, when you are returning, you are not returning to me the old goat, but you need to return the proceeds of that goat as well, the kids that it would have born during the time that you had it. So we need a much broader discussion around some of the income. If we are truly restituting, then we must be restituting even the value that the European museums gained when the artifacts were in their possession.
Thank you. There's a sister here. There's a sister here in yellow. And then we'll go to the brother, and to our sister. Sorry, yeah.
Thank you very much. I have two questions to the representative from ECOSOC. Thank you for highlighting what is being done. What would you think of the AU establishing an independent commission which would research and investigate the full extent of spiritual African art that was pillaged and is currently being held in various museums, and also putting in place a process of repatriation and reparation? The other is with respect to a comment, a very polite way of saying, I think you mentioned honoring those whose spiritual art was taken. It should be reparations. What forms of reparations would be ideal to repair the economic, the moral harm that the communities and also the individuals whose spiritual art was taken? Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, there's a brother there, right closer. We'll come to you, sir.
Thanks to the panel. My remarks is directed more at what I see as low-hanging fruits. On the first day, in the first panel, we talk about where we are and the level of consensus that is required post-Durban conference. So what the panel is presenting on Nigeria, I see this as some of the low-hanging fruits. But what I see happening also, and perhaps this is something for this meeting to reflect on, how can we intervene in African countries negotiating in silos with colonial masters on this sort of repatriation, sort of reappropriating this ongoing effort across the continent as part of one wider agenda. If we're trying to build this sort of coherence, if we're trying to build this sort of cohesion for common purpose, for reparations, then we have to appreciate that this ongoing discussion and about repatriation present one of the many opportunities that we can use. So I'm just saying the risk of African countries negotiating in silos of what would otherwise be a much bigger agenda here.
Okay, Brother John at the back.
Thank you very much, Brian. Johnny Kuba is my name I work also with Nana at the African Union Commission. I think there are divergent of views from what is evolving from this workshop. And I think, our brother from Nigeria talk about repatriation. We also talk about reparation. I think one thing that will help us to really work together as one entity under one platform is for Africa to have an African common position on reparation. And I think this should be reflected, probably it's a suggestion, should be reflected in the outcome document that will be coming out. And also at the level of the African Union, we can also be pushing forward so that African Union can also work with a platform like this for us to have one common African position on reparation. Thank you.
Thank you, John. My brother is here, my brother Jefta.
Yeah, and this is a question that recently the German government museums returned 23 artifacts to Namibia. And basically what the German cultural minister said that we are returning this object as a loan. And they ask, what do you mean as a loan? It's a permanent loan. I'm sure Professor Pedro knows about that. And there was no clarification from our government or museum, like, what do you mean is permanent loan? So I want you to speak to that, and then we also deal with the issue of human remains that still in the museum and have been returned. So I will ask ask Nana whether they're also developing a framework around a return of those human remains, and because they are very sensitive to the culture, returning of the skulls of human beings. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
We can't say anything.
No, my question is also in all this and in some of this research, are we also putting out the people who actually did these crimes? Like, who exactly went and took these people? Who are the murderers and so on? Because, this needs to be popular. For some reason, they're going to be heroes somewhere there where they live. Somebody has to put this information out so that the young Africans can, know these are like the top murderers of the, world. I'm talking about, we're always talking about the artifact and the people from which they took it from and everything, but somebody committed crimes and somebody helped them. And there were systems and most of these people represented governments. They were like not just random people who just happened to be there and took some artifact. They were sent by government. They were financed by some people. And when they went back, they had spaces where they could keep these things. It's not just about some individuals also, who just kept things because they liked it. So we need also that part of the story.
Yeah, it's getting interesting. We've got Professor Campbell. We've got, let's start. Prof, I'll come back to you. I have to close the session off in exactly 7 minutes. So what I'm going to do is take our sister, Miriam, come to Professor Campbell, come to Ambassador Salah, and then I know this is a debate. So the question we're hearing is, what's the link? In the UN definition, restitution is part of reparations. Can I repeat that? In the UN definition, restitution is part of reparations. But when you yourselves are imagining, what is the link between restitutive work and reparative justice and reparations? The political and the technical link. Thank you, Maria.
Okay. Thank you very much. I just would like to make a few comments, and I will not repeat what has been said already. I agree with almost everybody fully. What I just would like to say is that reparations and restitution is extremely important in many ways. And of course, when we talk about the other crimes committed, including the murders, the destruction of Benin, the Kingdom of Benin, that majority of even Nigerians, talking less of Africans or people around the globe, don't know how powerful it was. Talking about the structure that when the Portuguese went there first and saw Benin, they did not believe their eyes how organized the city was. Its wall, its buildings, its society, and the rulers. These are things that even children in Nigeria don't really learn about. So it is not enough for us to get our looted objects back from the descendants of the perpetrators. And now I don't want to go into the other part of reparations that others have mentioned. But what is very important is for us to look into the future as well and see how we can capitalize on what we have achieved and how we can go on higher levels. One very important thing, in my opinion, is that a common policy must be developed within ECOWAS, within the AU, to see how strategically we can get back not even as many of the objects and remaining, I don't even know how to put it. I mean, we all know that there were dead bodies, bones, skulls of our murdered brothers and sisters exhibited. In Belgium, there was what they call the human zoo. We have to talk about these things, that they gained so much money from these things. And even if we cannot succeed in claiming that money back, but we have to see how, with this common framework and common policy, we can build African economies, partly by educating our children in the schools, making sure that we have adequate 21st century standard museums. And then those who have been paying in London, in Paris, in Berlin, the European people, if they want to see these artifacts looted from Benin, from Ife, from Ile-Ife, or anywhere, they will be forced to come to Nigeria, to Ghana, to Senegal, to Namibia, to Kenya, anywhere they want to see. They will pay their tickets and they will spend their money to boost the economy of our countries.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So, whilst I prepare for my last two interventions, until 1956, to our brothers and sisters who may not know this, the colonial regimes of Belgium and took Congolese children and adults, kept them in zoos, and people would go to the zoo and pay to watch these Africans that were kept like animals. And I want you, as you listen to the stories, to draw parallels with the experiences under slavery and the continuity of white supremacy. And the Belgian atrocities in particular, whether are worth noting, as are the German, as are the French, and the English. Dr. Ambassador Salah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, my brother Brian. Maybe I should call you with the real title, Comrade Brian. Thank you very much. I just want to comment quickly on two things. One, in 2009, a partnership on democratic governance and human rights started between Africa and Europe. I've been having the honor to coordinate this partnership from the African side since 2009. One important chapter or part of this partnership is the return of artifacts and archives and art pieces to Africa. An African position has been developed, and it took us really a marathonic processes to get all African member states to agree on an African position. Then we went into negotiations with the European side, and of course the European side were not happy that Africa is united on this matter, and they kept requesting, to delay the negotiations a year and 2 and 3. Finally, what happened is the Africa that was united suddenly became divided over the matter, and each and every member state wishes to be or to enter into bilateral discussions with the European. This is where we are now, for your information, and this information is not classified. Africa failed to unite after being united on this matter. Now, we don't have an African position. We don't have an African united on this matter because each and every member state demanded that this matter should be bilateral matter. So I really hope that the African position that was adopted in 2011 will be revived by a call from this summit. After all, if you are African, you are the African Union, and the leadership of the African Union called the African Union a people-centered organization. So you, as the people of Africa, I think it is now timely for you to call on the African Union and African member states to revive that particular African position so we can again begin this process as a united continent. Thank you very much.
We have to end here. Please give Professor Campbell, and then we'll close it here.
Oh, thank you. I want to commend the panelists, especially my brother from Nigeria. I wanted him to stress the importance of Kwame Opoku, because many people do not know that for 50 years, Kwame Opoku single-handedly has been doing this work all over the world as a trailblazer, someone that African Union, African descendants, and people involved in reparations should know his name and to know the sacrifices and the work that he's done on this subject.
You don't have to answer all the questions, so I'm going to just ask you to prioritize the one thing you want to respond to. The rest, I think that the tea break will give us an opportunity to debate. But what I would like you to respond to, Nana, there was a specific question on, or comment from Dr. John Nkubaje on having a common Africa position, and from Ambassador Salah on reviving the common position. And then I think that I asked you silly questions. Just take one, take a minute. The rest, if you take slightly more, you'll be forgiven. But just a minute would be good. Let's end with you, Peju. We'll end with you. Let's start with the gentleman. I think you had some questions. Yeah, please go ahead. Now, do you want to start?
Thank you. First, I want to make a comment about the African Union. We are working, or you are working at something, and you have invited us all. There was a meeting of experts on restitution and repatriation November, December last year. It was held in Dakar, Senegal. So we participated, and we are forming, I didn't say we are formed, we are forming a common African position. And this is an opportunity for everybody now to contribute to this African common position. We shall be meeting in August 20 to 22 in Dakar, Senegal, to finally ratify what we believe is the common African position. But I think we have been wrong so far in the sense that we didn't invite you to join in with us. Please, this is an opportunity. You can always write your opinion to the African Union now, what you think we should actually put down as the common position. Thank you. So, if you want me to say one or two other things about this? Yeah. Okay. Okay.
We can't just...
okay. Something about Europe is the tendency to cause schism, dividing us. The royal palaces, the governments, they will come in between us as we are not doing the same thing, a struggle to bring back African antiquities. The people in diaspora, they want them to think in another fashion. The government, as if we are doing something different. No, we are all doing the same thing. Let us talk more. Let us meet more. And Africans, global Africans, should aid us because you have the voice. You are in Europe, you are in the United States, you are in Canada, and all these places. Your voices are heard, clearer outside. Contribute to this. This is about the best assets that Africa has, our artifacts and antiquities. Thank you.
Quickly, I think it's really just to stress the need for unity of purpose around this issue. When you hear, the tidbit about Germany loaning back a piece of property that belongs to us, it's part of the conversation that we had 2 days ago about the perpetrators of all of these injustices and their inability to go beyond acknowledgement and regret to actual liability. And so to be able to get to a point where we are going to be successful, I think, because these are all issues that are subject to negotiation. And to be successful in negotiation, you have to have the weight of the entire continent and all its member states behind one common position. And I'm happy that because of the focus on this issue, so did somebody say something? Okay, because of the focus on this issue from the theme of the year for last year, that the common position is now being revived, and I think we all have a role to play, especially civil society. Lastly, I think this cannot be dissociated from the overall conversation on reparative justice. You said yourself, restitution is part of reparation, so you cannot really separate the two. The continent has been violated in so many different ways, and I think we need to be made whole in all of those different ways. Thank you.
Thank you. You raised a very important point about definition of terms, artifact, antiquities. If these are art, if we cannot agree as a people what these works represent, then there's a problem. There's also the politics of language, and I thank you for calling that out, the Eurocentric descriptions or expressions like the works were taken away or they found their way to Europe. How do you explain that when people were violently killed and the king was exiled to Calabar? Now, these were sacred materials, and one of the arguments for restitution over the years has been that the culture is still in existence. The Oba of Benin is still on the throne. The festivals still occur for which these materials are used. They are still very relevant. They don't belong in a culture that is lost, that is extinct. And so when we talk about reclaiming these materials, it is very important that we look at the source communities. You don't repatriate an object that was taken from the west of Cameroon to the north of Cameroon. And you have to give works back to the community where these works were taken away from. And I think for many of the people who ask questions, the issue of reparation was also mentioned. And I think this goes to those who are negotiating for these works to be returned to their source communities, that this is a very vital aspect. Somebody mentioned the fact that these works have accrued a lot of revenue in the West. Of course, that had happened. So it's very important that the provenance history, the history of the economics of it, the amount of money that's been gathered or that has accrued from these works should also be sent along with the works to wherever they've been looted from. Sadly, only very few works are returned to the continent. Yes, 2 works, July 1st, from Germany. Over 1,000 works are there. 2 works from Aberdeen and Cambridge. We're talking about thousands of works. And Dan Hicks says about 10,000, because if you look at each item, it is that large. So I think that there's some kind of disconnection here. And I think it is very important that even though these works are returned to Nigeria, we must recognize the importance of those who suffered the trauma that happened in 1897. Thank you.
Well, I think what I would like us to do beyond the formal session, and also hopefully over the next 2 days, is part of the reason somebody reminded me during the break. Where is my sister? She reminded me, we really came to talk to each other than hearing speeches, as a desire that we talk to each other across the oceans and heal, because there is amongst ourselves, as there is always in any family, healing. That's why I was discouraging us from sitting in particular ways, because it's, you tend to sit in particular ways. So I think that if we all are conscious, let's reach out so that at least we get to know a little bit more. As Professor Campbell will tell you, in the early days, one of the young men, when the elders were talking, they would say to me, because I was much smaller, and this young man, Kidogos, you go and talk outside. Turned out one of those young men later on became president. So I know the value of not talking to people. And at the time, if you had told me he would be president, I would have said no. because he talked about only music and never politics. Don't miss the opportunity to become best friends with the next president of the United States of America, or the next president of some country in the Caribbean or Africa, or the next billionaire, or the next such and such award winning. Let's connect at a meaningful way, or in meaningful ways. I'd like to ask you to please take our traditional picture. We take this traditional picture for documentation, and I'd like to invite my brother Cam to the stage. We'll start the next session immediately. Yeah. So another pom-pom and love for this wonderful. I must just confess that I've been Professor Peju's fan for a long time. So this picture is, for me, historic. Gentlemen, I'm not sure about you. Thank you. Yeah, so what we will do so that we don't disrupt, if you want or you need coffee or tea, please just stand up, go grab your coffee, come back. If you don't need it, please don't be tempted. Sit through. I think Brother Cam and I are going to try and... Hi, so good afternoon. So we have two of us. Would like... Hello, colleagues. Hello. You to be upstanding just for 1 minute. A good spot, just 1 minute. Here is a test of whether you actually believe in reparations. Okay? This is going to be interesting. In this test on whether you actually believe in reparations, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to use your elbow, just the elbow. You know why people fail? They don't listen to instructions. Please, in case an elbow in Africa is different from where I come from, okay, can all the Africans show me what your elbow is? Because I know there are things that are, I know that's your stomach, no, that's your chin. Yeah, no, that one, that, right? So I'd like you, can everybody coming from the US or the Caribbean show me what your elbow is? Your elbow. Okay, that's your fist though. Yeah, your elbow. I would like you to look across the room at somebody who's at least 3 meters or more away from you. Just lock. Yeah, 3, oh yeah, okay, that too. Lock your eyes with them. Lock your eyes with them. You have to lock eyes with somebody, and then you got to tell them, I got you, I'm watching you. Right? Hello? Hey. Now use your elbow to tell them, number one, you love them. Tell them I love you. Just the elbow. Just the elbow. All right. So I know you are very good at using your elbows. Keep locked with that kindred spirit. Keep locked with that kindred spirit. Now I'd like you to use only your neck and your head with no voice. Hello? Just from here up, and please make sure the people behind me are doing the same. From here up, I'd like you to tell the person, you look fantastic. Don't use any words. Just use, aha. No, you're supposed to use just your neck, not your hands now. All right. Yeah. So the last one. If you get this right, I will know that you're super geniuses. Your knees. Yeah, use your knees. So, you are not supposed to use anything above your waist. You can use your leg, but it is supposed to be the knee as the mouthpiece. So use your knee to tell the person we're strong together. I'm supposed to look and say, thank you so much. So what I'm going to do is take a short period of time, take questions. SIPO was supposed to be here and speak on the role of philanthropy in supporting reparations. I'm going to constitute myself into SIPO, although I'm a darker shade and I lack the sense of humor of SIPO. Here is the traditional understanding of philanthropy as a reference to the space of organizations and individuals that make resources available for social causes, and in more recent terms, for economic transformation as well. It describes entities that emerged as a result of colonial thinking. And in the Victorian England, philanthropies were structured as rogue charity. The idea that those who owned plantations felt pity for the poor, and they gave the poor little things to hold on to, so that this could assuage the sense of exclusion and injustice amongst the poor. So the history of philanthropy as charity is anchored in the sense of guilt of the property of the rich towards the poor, a very pejorative sense, that the poor were in the condition that they were in, and that there was an injunction spiritually that the poor would always be with you. Philanthropy emerged or develops with the development of industrial capital as the idea that you could teach, don't give the poor fish, you could teach them how to fish, they'll be self-sustaining. Even as that discourse grew into other modes such as social engineering, which is the idea that we could use money that was made through particular forms of accumulation, that the excess could be applied to create a society and a set of values and social progress that was similar to that which those who were rich had. In its evolution, philanthropy was therefore neither political nor transformative. It was never intended to change the base or the structure of society. Why is it important when you are talking about reparative justice? It is important because all the slave owners, when they gave meals to slaves that worked in their plantations, they felt they were doing charity to the Negroes. This idea that your ancestors could work, be beaten, be raped, and be given cooking oil and a dress or a shoe to look civil by philanthropy is important to remember, because philanthropy and racialized capitalism or racial capitalism are inseparable in the development of the world. And it is important for you to understand that you could be a philanthropist and a racist at the same time. I want that to sink, because those of us who work for philanthropies, we have to make this statement all the time. The fact that you see a poor person on the street and you throw a couple of coins does not mean that you have a commitment to ending poverty. It may simply mean that you see the new sense of poverty caused by your mode of accumulation, and your privilege speaks to you, but you are unwilling to abandon it. So you appease what you think will be your position or situation in heaven, so that you can arrive there and say, at least I gave them crumbs. Philanthropy was never about distribution and redistribution in the economy. As philanthropy grew, social justice dimensions, humanitarian dimensions, and investment in education, investment in healthcare. But the philanthropy of the oppressor and the slave trade was always different from the philanthropy of the community, which was constructed around our values of mutuality, our values of solidarity, in which poverty was not a condition, but it was the outcome of impoverishment, which was a deliberate act by those who wielded economic, social, political, and state power to construct, especially amongst black people, poor black people, and poverty that was intergenerational or transgenerational. If you are a woman, you will know that even philanthropy would come and teach women how to make soap, how to make doils, how to make clothes, the feminization and institutionalization of the division of labor based on gender, the gendered role of inferiority based on white supremacy, male supremacy, and therefore the institutionalization of patriarchy was key in its evolution. In the context of dealing with reparations, to keep the long story short, it is important that those of you who run institutions not reduce the interface with philanthropy to the delivery of grants or money. Money in itself is not liberatory. You cannot liberate purely by giving money. If you could, you would have ended racism by giving racist money. Values and respect, dignity and freedom may need money, but money in and of itself is not as important as the process by which the money is distributed and redistributed. To the extent that those of us who work for philanthropy appreciate when the outcomes and the processes and the objectives are determined by the philanthropy of what you can be funded to do, philanthropy is incapable of facilitating revolution. That therefore those who are able to write projects and proposals that fit that which the philanthropists have determined is the theory of change. Now I need to understand, you to understand, because you struggled too long and you know this, that change is not a theory. The streams that water revolution, that feed into the stream or the lake of transformation of our continent are not based purely on a theory of change that fits into a log frame. If you had asked Nelson Mandela, or if you had asked Dr. Garvey, Malcolm X to write a log frame of what they were doing, which makes us sit here today, or Harriet Tubman to write a log frame, none of what would have fitted in that log frame was A, fundable, or two, would have made sense. Nothing transformative, nothing revolutionary makes sense. If you are funded, including by a person like myself, on the basis of making sense to my log frame, I'd like to give you good news. You are as far from revolution as Mars is from the Earth. At some stage, there must be a disequilibrium and a discomfort between the direction and flow of money and the flow of the juices and imperatives of revolution or transformation. If the global accumulation model has resulted in very few people who look like you owning the resources that can be distributed to fund the causes that are necessary for our liberation, it essentially means we have a scandal and a crisis, which is we are funded by those who don't look like us to do work to dismantle the power of those who look like our funders. I'm saying there's a job for black philanthropy. There's a job for individual philanthropy. There's a job for all sorts of different types of philanthropy. Our organizations need more and more now to be funded by ourselves. And many of you here have funded your own organizations. Our global causes now need black business, conscious business, to be part of this. Herein lies the dilemma. They may not share the ideology that we espouse. How do you get alliance with those who've accumulated? How do you get them to give to a cause that essentially threatens their existence? Karl Marx talked of class suicide. Is it possible for philanthropy to commit class suicide by decolonizing wealth and the means of expropriating and appropriating wealth? You know, I have the capacity, and I could go on forever. Since I wasn't the speaker, my sense here was, I just can't, I wasn't the speaker. So my sense here was, this struggle for reparations will not fit in a log frame. But some amongst us may need to fit components of it in log frames. It is the messy bits that don't fit into a log frame that will be problematic. So let me tell you ahead of time what will be fundable. Nelson Mandela, when he talked of forgiveness, because there is an eternal expectation that the black person will forgive, especially if the crime is committed by a multinational corporation from the West or by a white person. But there is an abiding expectation that the black person will go for justice and accountability if the grievance is caused by another black person. That is why there's more justice talk for harm done by African dictators in the post-independence era, and more so in the last couple of years. We are taking them to the International Criminal Court. There is an appetite and tons of money to support that. If you doubt me, the amounts of money pouring into Ukraine will just tell you there's not been as much money pouring into you trying to get accountability for occupation of Haiti, occupation of all our countries. I need you to understand that you will only be funded if what you say is not problematic to the majority, for those of you in America. And majority is a euphemism for whiteness. And as my sister Jasmine likes to remind me, Brian, you have to almost navigate around white fragilities, or else the proposal will be dismissed as lacking evidence, lacking coherence, lacking a clear theory of change. So if you know you will not be funded, can I repeat? If you know you will not be funded, it also means that if MacArthur, Open Society, Wellsprings, who've been supporting racial justice and have gone off on a limb, and let me celebrate MacArthur, because I'm from Open Society, I can't celebrate myself, but MacArthur, love to you, lots of love to you. My challenge would simply be this: if those of you who made this pass go past the door can sustain it for the next 10 years and not 2 years, you will need, no, let me explain this to you. Those who sit in organizations this big, have to struggle internally to sustain this focus. That means we can't just come to conferences and talk, because they have to come and translate it into the internal dialect, which is what were the results, what came out of it. For us, meeting is humanizing. For them, meeting is just a talk show. For us, coming together across continents, because we haven't done this for a long time, is the substance of healing. For them, delivering into a corporate entity, this is just a waste of time, more carbon miles. These days, you use climate change to defeat the imperative of black folk to get together and meet. So it is not just the role of philanthropy that's important. It is the role of those of you who are struggling. I don't want activists to be disabled writing project proposals to fit into templates of donors. But if we're going to do this, how do we get from amongst ourselves people who are responsible to us, who know how to speak the dialect that unlocks the resources, so that not all of us are in this beauty pageant of trying to raise resources from folks who don't or may not fully believe in what we do. The fight back you see externally is a fight back that happens in philanthropy. Every progressive philanthropy has within it white fragilities. Every progressive space like the UN has within it white fragilities. No matter how progressive the leadership, the process that sustains reparative justice has to be negotiated. So what's my clarion call? The job of philanthropy is not to dictate how you struggle. The job of philanthropy is to sustain your struggles, right? And philanthropy needs to simplify the administrative process of getting resources to those who are on the front line, so that you are not reduced to people who have to comply with 99 requirements. Between you and I, there is the US compliance law, what the law of the United States requires or prohibits. So if you're supported by US philanthropies, many things around compliance are related to your demand for certain reforms on how social justice struggles are funded. Many African philanthropies are not funding social justice. You know why? If it is not in compliance with what the regimes that sustain their wealth want, they'll be shut down and victimized. Until we build a firewall around those in the philanthropies that are supporting racial justice, those within African and emergent philanthropies and individuals, until we learn the dialect of speaking to them, we have one problem. We either just pay it by ourselves. The last point I want to make, philanthropy cannot determine the content of the agenda. That has to be determined by the struggle, by the alliance, by the united front. But we can only do that if we appreciate three things. Number one, we have a limited window of focus and interest from money. I hope this I can say. I think those who work with me know that I think I've reached a stage in life where I actually don't think that I need to be diplomatic. I failed. I worked for the UN. I failed in diplomacy. So that's why I'm here clowning, right? Number one, we just need to be clear about it, right? We actually need a huge amount of money. I don't believe one philanthropy or two philanthropies or three, no matter how generous, can help us build the global alliance. So a lot of it will have to happen without philanthropy money. Can I repeat that? A lot of what we do will have to happen without philanthropy money. Can I repeat? A lot of what we do will not be done by external philanthropy money. A lot of it has to be funded by ourselves. The second point I wanted to make, the dislocation between the elite of black struggle and the streets of black struggle is often bigger than the distance between liberal whites and the streets of black struggle. And I know that you're going to stone me for this. A lot of elites who are part of this struggle, that is me included, and Mahmoud, you know my story. I've said this to you. A lot of our people who fight for justice, other than those of you who actually work in the front lines, they talk reparations, human rights, and justice within conferences. They actually, Dr. Joy, they never go to where our people are. Right? They never go to the prisons. They never go. They can write beautiful theses about carcerality problem in black community, but they never visit those young men and young women. They can write about refugees. They have never been to a refugee camp. They can write about villages. They have never been to a village camp, to a village. So what am I saying? We will be seen as fake as long as our struggle has no real touch with movements and communities. That's a fundamental issue. We will be seen as fake. But I want to caution you. There are many gatekeepers in movements. I have, Dr. Salah met me when I still worked at the front line of movements. There are many gatekeepers in movements. Can I repeat? There are many gatekeepers in movement. Godfathers, godmothers, movement divas, movement gigolos, movement, the ones who have the, what do you call it? The title deeds to the movement, and the ones who have. Our biggest problem is that. Our second biggest problem, the ideas keeping our movements together are either elite ideas, and there's nothing wrong with elite ideas, or they're foreign ideas, by foreign to our community, or number three, they are ideas we recycle to be courteous to the donor, to be courteous elsewhere. I am always angry. Jasmine will tell you. I'm sitting with folk and I'm hoping you will blast us because I'm sitting on the other side. And everybody says, oh, whatever you want, yes, we can make this adjustment. And I was sitting there hoping people would say, go to hell. We're not making this adjustment. This is what we want. This is how it will be. What am I saying to you? Until you demand from friends, you will operate from the illusion that Africa needs to get rid of. The world does never, ever gives you what you deserve. The world only gives you what you demand. Until you demand it, you won't get it. When you deal with philanthropy, we are friendly, we hug, we smile, we are with you. We speak the language. At the end of the day, those of you from philanthropy who are here, the one who has the paycheck and asks for the report has power that's not elected, has power that's not selected, has power that's based purely on who they are. I hope I've been able, in the absence of SIPO, to keep you entertained and to say to you, philanthropy is not liberation, but you need it the same way you need water in your car. The fuel of your car is what you put in yourself as the movement. Thank you.
Let's give another hand for Brother Brian. Who came forward off the cuff, and now we're going to turn to those who are on the front line doing this work. In this stage of the program, we're going to talk about advocacy, some of the strengths and opportunities in advocacy. Before we do so, I'm going to just give some general comments on advocacy in the reparations space, and Dr. Joy is going to give some comments on advocacy in the healing space, and then we're going to kind of open it up to those of you out here who are also in the advocacy space, that we can talk about some of the challenges and opportunities that you're facing. We're going to start with Sister Robin and then Brother Jephthah when we do that, and then it'll give others opportunity to get some of your thoughts together around what you're doing in the advocacy space. So we heard a lot about the narrative and struggling and proposing for reparations and advocating and fighting for reparations. And it's very important that we are clear on our narrative. And I'm not going to go over what our narrative is, but just a few points around the narrative that we came up with when we were in Bellagio, that the narrative has to be simple. We talked about earlier about simplifying this issue. When you're advocating and organizing, you have to know how to take complex issues and simplify them for the masses. And you have to know your audience to do that. So the first thing, your narrative has to be simple. It has to speak to the what, the why, and the overall context and why we're struggling for repair. What are the conditions that our people are living with today that is a result of the harms and crimes that have been committed against us? What's the overall context? A lot of people we find out in the reparations that are in the space of social justice don't know that their issue is connected to the historical atrocities committed against our people. They think they're fighting around prison justice or they're fighting around housing and don't know how those issues are related to this historical narrative, this historical action of crimes committed against us as a people. Enslavement and apartheid, et cetera, and colonialism, they don't see the connection. So we have to put it into the overall context when we're speaking to our people around this issue. And we also have to know that we're speaking simultaneously to various audiences. And so we have to tailor our narrative to each particular audience that we're speaking to, whether we're speaking to the perpetrators, whether we're speaking to our people, whether we're speaking to allies, or we're speaking to, as Brian said, to funders. We have to know who we're speaking to, and we have to tailor our narrative for these particular audiences. Whether we're struggling on the continent or we're struggling for repair or fighting for repair in our spaces where we're, like in America, in a white settler nation, or we're in the Caribbean where we've liberated those spaces, there has to be a framework that I believe that we should all be working from. And that was one of the things that came up in the last conversation is, what is an overall framework that we can all be sharing around reparations as we leave this conference? And I talked about it yesterday in my talk about the Durban model. And I think this is the framework that my former organization has used since 2009, 10, when I crafted this framework, having watched what happened in Durban 2, and that's the framework around crimes, injury, and repair. No matter where we find ourselves on the planet as African people, we are living a state of an existence as a result of 600 years of crimes committed against us. No matter whether it was on the continent, in the islands, in South America, Central America, our life, as Brother Brian and others have stated, has been shaped, especially Professor Campbell, in his 7 areas of capital, 7 stages of capital, that our lives have been shaped as a result of these crimes that have been committed. And from those crimes, we exist in a state of a legacy where there is a harmful, negative, injurious legacy of those particular crimes. And we experience those in all the disparities that we live under and the material conditions in which we live under, whether we're on the continent, whether we're in the islands, whether we're in Europe, or wherever we find ourselves. So crimes, we say there were 3 periods, whether you're on the continent or whether you're in the diaspora. Those periods are the periods of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery, the periods of apartheid in the West or colonialism on the continent, and then the post-apartheid and the post-neocolonial period. When we talk about the injuries or the legacy, in COBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, came out with what we call the 5 injury areas. And for years, people were asking, what are y'all fighting for? What do you want when you talk about reparations? And so we determined that it was a lot of things. But primarily, the injury exists in these 5 areas. And one area is around economics, not just a wealth gap, but Yes, employment, business development, et cetera. In the area of economics, in the area of education, from preschool on up to postgraduate. In the area of health, that was a major injury area. And there's, in each of these areas, a myriad of proposals can flow from each of these injury areas that we have to seek to direct resources for repair. Then there's the area of the criminal justice system or the criminal punishment system, mass incarceration, new Jim Crow as it's called in America. And then the final area is around our culture and our peoplehood, how we went from a sovereign people coming from the continent of Africa to a people who still suffer today in all of our spaces around identity. Who are we? Even in the continent of Africa, we have clearly defined ethnic groups and clearly defined national boundaries. There's still a conflict around identity when it comes to our Western educations on the continent, or as opposed to our, even when we talk about our spiritual systems, whether we're Catholic or we practice an indigenous system or Islam or some of those other systems. So around culture and peoplehood is a major injury area, no matter where we find ourselves on the planet. So if we begin with these 5 injury areas, education, economics, employment, criminal justice, and peoplehood and sovereignty, culture and peoplehood, those will be areas that we can all begin to agree upon and begin to advocate in our spaces. And then the third area of this particular model, crimes, injury, repairs, reparations. In America, we wrote into our federal bill, I had the opportunity to be the lead writer on the federal legislation in America that was submitted by NARC, the National African American Reparations Commission. We determined we would revise H.R. 40, which is the number of the bill, and submit that to John Conyers, who accepted the revision. We wrote in there the international framework on reparations, which has those 5 components that I talked about the other day. Cessation and guarantees of non-repetition, restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, and satisfaction. These are the international framework that as we advocate, no matter what space we're in, when we talk about reparations, these are the outcomes of whatever reparations program we're planning. Does it stop and halt the systems of domination that were put in place to keep us in this state of lack economically on the planet? Does it return us to where we would have been if the system of the transatlantic slave trade, the chattelization wars that came into the continent of Africa and underdeveloped Africa, where would we be, where would our nations, where would our ethnic groups be if those things had not happened? Where would we be if our labor was not extracted from us, our creativity, our ingenuity, and our genius was not extracted from us for 246 years for free to empower and elevate another people as opposed to use for our own good and our own self-determination? Where would we be? That's the area of restitution. And then compensation is for damages. It's for the trauma of rape and other torture and other forms of demoralizing and dehumanizing treatment that our ancestors suffered from. That doesn't have that economic price tag as far as stolen labor. So that's where the compensation comes in. Satisfaction is the return of our dignity. We talked about returning of our artifacts in the last panel. That's part of returning our dignity to us that was eroded as a result of the crimes that were committed against us. Satisfaction also includes apologies, but the apology we want is the apology that's in accord with international norms that mean it must also include actions to repair. See, that's why when we look around the world and these European countries talk about regret, as Dr. Beckles stated, they know if they offer an official apology under international norms, it automatically means that they must also engage in redress. And so that is the reason why when we advocate for apologies, and a lot of people are leading with apologies, in various spaces. I know in America, in some of our local areas, local reparations initiatives, apology is number one. But they're not leading with apology under international norms. They're leading with apologies that has been expressed historically that just says, I'm sorry, I recognize what I've done, and I commit to not doing it again. And we have a Senate apology and a House of Representatives apology from Congress in the United States that says just that. And in the Senate apology, it has a disclaimer that says, although we're apologizing and we recognize what we've done, you cannot use this to get reparations. And so these apologies must come with an international foundation, a standard and foundation that also includes redress. And we have to know the difference to that when we're advocating for apologies. And then the final area is rehabilitation. The organization that I was with, I got them to agree to do a research, a study, which was to research the current literature on transgenerational epigenetic inheritance and what some of those remedies could be on transgenerational epigenetic inheritance. And I said a lot there. I don't know if anybody ever heard of the term, but transgenerational, Brian used it earlier. Transgenerational means across multiple generations, more than 3. Epigenetics is the science of how the environment affects the operation of the gene. It doesn't affect the gene, but it affects how the gene operates. And then inheritance means it's something that this particular environmental change or environmental propensity for your gene to operate, you've inherited from a previous generation. And what we found out is science around that the transatlantic historical trauma, period. Historical trauma is trauma that happens to a group of people. And enslavement was a historical trauma. Apartheid was a historical trauma. Colonization was historical trauma. The chattelization wars was a historical trauma. And what science is showing is that historical trauma can tell your genes to switch on when your genes should be switching off. It can tell your genes to stay on when it should be switching off, or to not switch on at all, and which these things lead to premature illness, a whole host of illness, premature death, et cetera, premature aging, all that. That's what science is showing. And so we've been through this period of historical trauma unstopped for 500-600 years, depending on where we've been. And so we know that has had a historical effect on us. So when we talk about reparations, when it comes to rehabilitation, this whole health piece, we can start with the notion that there's inherited injury as a result of the historical trauma. Not only, as Dr. Joy will talk about more, I'm sure, the psychological injury, but also physical injury from the historical trauma. So that's the framework, the model, the Durbin, which I call the Durbin model, crimes, injury, repair, or harms, legacy, and reparations is how the Global Circle is speaking to that model. When advocating, we have to build a base. And that base is part of that base, and the significant part of that base is from the injured community, no matter where we find ourselves. Will it be the nation as a whole? Will it be ethnic groups who have had particular injury? Would it be built around corporations and institutional victims, like in the case of Georgetown University, that those victims of the sale from the Jesuit church of their ancestors, they formed the base for which the struggle occurs. So you can have, particular corporations or institutions that affected a particular people, or you can have governments that affected a particular ethnic group, as in case of the Herero in Namibia. That's from where your base is built. We use in America in COBRA, which was a grassroots organization I was with, we used the GLASS model. The GLASS model was developed by Dr. Raymond Winbush, who wrote the book, Should America Pay? One of the first black scholarly texts on reparations in America. And this GLASS model of building your base consists of G is grassroots organizations, L is legislators, A is academics, A is attorneys, S is scholars, and the final S is students. So that's the GLASS model. So when you're building your base of advocacy, you want to touch on each one of those areas and bring people in. You're going to have your scholarship. You're going to have your attorneys, because for us in America, it's a constitutional challenge to everything we talk about when we talk about reparations. And so you need in COBRA, the organization I was with, it was formed by a lot of the founding members were from the National Council of Black Lawyers. And so you're going to have your attorneys, you're going to have your legislators. One of the things that we're seeing in America right now is that you have to have a courageous and bold legislator to lead this process in a white dominant majority space. If you don't have that, you're not going anywhere. And so legislators is a key component in building your base. You have to also have allies, and what we're also doing is forming what we call reparations stakeholder authorities, groups who have determined that they will interact with the governments from a position of strength, having interacted with the community and gotten the permission of the community to speak on their behalf to these particular entities. Finally, we want to identify who you are targeting. This is very important because you might have multiple parties that you're targeting. Is the government the perpetrator that you're targeting? For those of us who are targeting reparations from enslavement, it is the governments that we live in. For those on the continent, it is the governments in Europe. And in some cases, it can be both the governments we live in and the governments in Europe. For instance, in America, our CARICOM brothers and sisters said that we can join on to their struggle because in the state of Florida was colonized by Spain before it became part of the 13, it was never part of the 13 colonies, but when it became part of America, there was Spanish control of the state of Florida. We know with the Haitian Revolution that from New Orleans all the way up to Canada, the French had enslaved Africans on North American continent. And it was only after the Haitian Revolution that the France had to sell that territory, they called the Louisiana Territory, to America, that it became part of America, but it was also the French government. So we have in America a potential to target multiple parties, not just the European government, but also European governments. Is the government that you exist in, will it be an ally or take the lead position, like in CARICOM, where the nations themselves are taking lead positions in the struggle? And that's what we determined that here on the continent, we have to have more African leaders take the lead position in this struggle for reparations. And so we have to have campaigns targeting our own governments in this instance to bring them aboard to this particular issue of repair. And sometimes we'll find that the government becomes the perpetrator, as in our brother Jeff let us know in the Herrera in Namibia Institute, where the government has determined that it is not going to use the resources in a way that brings repair and healing to the brothers, the group that experienced the genocide on behalf of the German government. Are the perpetrators corporations, institutions, and are the perpetrators these new institutions that have developed that is continuing the injury, that they weren't around during colonialism, but they're continuing the injuries from the colonial era. Or they weren't around during apartheid or enslavement, but they're continuing the injury that props up and supports the system of anti-blackness, exploitation, and the demoralization of African people. So I'm just going to stop with that. These are some of the foundational bases when it comes to advocacy that we should be aware of. And it cuts across, again, across boundaries, cuts across nations and ethnicities. If you're black and we're all suffering from a 600-year system, as it was shared multiple times today, that it is a global system, and it's from that global system that we can develop shared responses and shared actionable advocacy to get redressed. So I'm going to turn it over to Sister Joy.
So I'm going to try to fold everybody into this process, because what we do is we really need your expertise. We need we're going to need your feedback. So I'm going to kind of preface this advocacy piece with actionable things. My experience with moving things from something conceptual to something that is actual. So one of the first things I think we have to do, particularly those of us that are working in health, that are working in that social systems of trying to save our people who are within these systems, is we have to learn when we come together to stay in the room. And what I mean by that is we get to have differing opinions. We're not a monolith. We often will get in our feelings and want to leave because someone doesn't agree with us, or someone will come up and go, well, so-and-so doesn't agree with you. I said, well, do all white people agree? But we do that to each other. We don't give each other that room. And I think we need to start doing that. So I always say to people, stay in the room. Just stay in the room. We'll get through some of the hard parts, but we got to stay in the room. Second thing was Maynard Jackson, who was the mayor of course, Atlanta. There was usually a conference. I don't know if it goes on anymore, Black Mayors. It was a conference of Black mayors. And I happened to attend that. And Maynard Jackson said there's a few things we need to get rid of. We need to get rid of the scared Negro, and we got to get rid of the incompetent one. We cannot prop up people that are, keep us right. If, something's wrong, pull me to the side. We need to be able to do that. I so appreciate hearing Nicole saying she did a shift when she learned something. She learned something different and made a shift. We have to make those shifts. And therefore, we can't be so caught up that we prop up folks that aren't competent. We lose our own credibility even within our own communities when we do that. And two, we got to deal with the scared Negro, who is officially the gatekeeper, right? That's basically, and what I do is I bring science to that. I'll talk about it maybe tomorrow. But the part of it is that white people gravitate to the person of color, the indigenous person, the African-American person, the Latinx person that most feels like them. We call them Stephen and Stephanie, but they gravitate, and those people basically do their bidding and cause us harm. And then we got to try to figure out how to navigate in environments where they are. We got to figure out how to avoid that person that looks just like us. So that's number two. And I wanted to give a couple of concrete examples. One that has to do specifically with education. The other that really has to do with healthcare. People have often asked me about post-traumatic. We do have to create our own narrative. But we don't have to pathologize each other, right? We should put post-traumatic slave syndrome in the DSM. That's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. I said, no, you do not. I said, first of all, it doesn't belong in there. Because it's not a diagnosis that you're now going to get a code for that white people are going to get paid for trying to fix. Does that make sense? I'm going, no, you can't, because then that also suggests y'all just sick. You need to sit in a room and talk softly to people a couple of weeks, and y'all be fine. You're the problem. And that's what we cannot allow to happen within these systems. Of course they want to pathologize us. No, this requires justice. You see, it leaves out that social justice piece that says we can't get well without justice. I don't care how many times you talk softly to us or give us medication. Right? So we have to join those conversations around advocacy so we can have some pragmatism to how we move forward. So real life, real true experience. I was in Portland, Oregon, my fault. Walked in there on purpose. Anyway, so I'm there and I'm working with African American folks you have the who's who, because if you ain't from Portland and you didn't go to, Boise Elliott Elementary School, they don't see your hand when you raise your hand in the black community, because there's these little, you got to work your way in the trust of the community. So I'm noticing that, there's a Jewish health center, there's a Buddhist health center, Chinese health center, there's a indigenous, because they have the Confederated Tribes there, so they have their center. They have the Latin American health center. But when it came to black folks, we all had to go to that, whoever that HMO was that said, oh, no, give us the money, we'll take care of them. We didn't have our standalone, in this case, mental health center. So we were arguing for a standalone mental health center for black folks, right? So the first thing happened, we're literally going to Salem, arguing at the state level, right? So we had a dream team, picked a dream, with 7 of us. We had my sister who could run a small country all by herself, smart one in the family, who is truly an administrator and understood working in the governor's office in a variety of places. She was the spook who sat by the door that black folks were calling Uncle Tom. Well, she was saving their programs, right? But my sister, then we had the head of psychiatry of the #1 teaching hospital, Oregon Health Sciences University. We had him on our team. We had a reputable, strong black businessman there. We had a community advocate, and we had a religious leader in the community. So we went to the state level, and the first thing the state said to us was, well, we don't see any reason why you need to have a standalone mental health center for black people. There's no evidence that there's any need for that. We sent out a survey, and I said, how many people sent back your survey? How many black folks did you ask, and who did you ask, and where did you ask? Well, we can't give you those numbers. I went into the community. I went to the barber shop, the hair salon. I went to basketball games. I went to church. I went to community meetings, and I picked up a whole stack of surveys that said from black people, yes, I would rather have someone black on the other side of the table. I'm tired of smiling and laughing at jokes that are not funny and listening to people say things about me that look down on me. That's the gist of it. So I came back the first time and said, well, here's a list of folks we have that said they recognize it. Well, we're not certain you all have the level of education necessary for you to have a standalone. In other words, you don't have enough black professionals in mental health. Now remember, we're talking about Portland. There ain't but 3 of us, but we all showed up. But I went and had one of my graduate assistants go out into the community, because they're not in the black community, because they're trying to pay off the loans. There's no jobs in the black community. So they were out in the suburbs. She found 215 professionals, master's level and above. I said, ask them if there was a community center, would they come and would they work there? 100% yes. So now I've got a stack of 215. So I've answered your question of what the community wants, because I went to the people. 2, I was able to show you we had the caliber and the level of education experience in our community that would be willing to be there. Then they said, well, there's no real evidence that suggests that whether you have a black therapist or a black doctor makes any difference. Okay, so this is how God works, they would say. This is how God works. They opened, remember I told you the HMO, they got the money from the state and the city and the county. They got all the money to serve black people, got a couple of black people on staff, the janitor, and maybe a receptionist, to say, look, we have black folks. It was run by white women, and the head of the organization, they're now going to serve. They put a little pilot program in the middle of the black community and decided they're going to serve the community. Well, it just so happened right around the time that we were trying to make our case, she circulated a memo that said we will no longer serve angry or agitated black men. Now that's a problem, yeah? We actually got hold of the memo and published it in the local black newspaper and shamed them, right? So now we got folks' ear. I said, this is what your folks do, and here's the situation. Brother, real life situation. He's like 6'6", 6'8", 250, bipolar, lost his job, lost his medical care, lost his medication. So he's off of medication 3 weeks. He hears that this pilot program he can come and he can get medication if he comes and signs up, because that was the deal. So I'm saying this literally at the state, I'm telling this story. He walks into the building, and who's there sitting behind a table that he's going to meet with around his mental health problems is Cindy Lou Who from Arkansas. So Cindy's sitting there turning the color of ripened fruit because she's so scared she don't know what to do. Everything that Daddy said has walked in the room. So he comes and the first thing he does, he sees her. Now remember, he doesn't have a synapse firing right. He's been off medication 3 weeks. But he knows, don't scare the white girl. So he takes and pushes his chair back, diverts his gaze, tries to make himself smaller so he would not intimidate her, so he would then take care of her so she could take care of him. And I argued that you have injured him. Before he could even get help, he's been injured. Her response, but I'm not a racist. My response, I don't care. 300 years of history walked in the room. And maybe you, Cindy Lou Who, with all your MSW, LCSW, and whatever letters you have, should not be on the other side of that table, because you have injured him with your presence. He has got to undress himself in the presence of someone he does not trust that will do him harm. So we argued, took us 7 years. Because there's one more problem. Y'all don't know how to handle money. Y'all misappropriate funds. Y'all don't know. So we hooked up with the Oregon Health Sciences University, reputable chief of psychiatry, black man, that became, for us, until we could stand alone, they became our umbrella. And there is now the Avell Gorley Center for Healing in Portland, Oregon, of all places. Took us 7 years. With black folks complaining and going and having interviews against us. Black folks saying, no one asked me. I should have been in those meetings, right? And now we're dealing with naysayers, and those very same people, because they got post-traumatic, those very same people were there to cut the ribbon when we opened the doors. So what I understand about this process is it's a long game here. And we got to take it from beginning to end, and we can't do it by ourselves. Remember, we brought folks from those different lanes in there to get us over the hump and to actually establish something that we wanted to see happen. Last thing I'll say is education. I talked about education briefly, but the bottom line is we are sending our children into a war zone with no armor. We sent them in as young as 3 years old. Yale Child Center did a study of over 133 teachers, preschool teachers. And they asked them to look at some videos and, to point out any potential problem behavior that they saw in these videos. Well, here's the reality. There were no troubling or problem behaviors. But they didn't wait to see whether they'd push the button when they saw it. They looked at the trajectory of their gaze to see who they looked for. They didn't care what they pushed the button. They said, where do you look when you expect a problem? And they looked at the black boy and black children and children of color, just in general. So now, let me roll that back and explain, how do we operationalize? This is scientific collected information. How do we use it? How do we weaponize it so that we can hold people accountable that are in the presence of our children? So here's what Dr. Joy does, because I have grandchildren that are in the system that are going into those buildings. But I'm not going to sit here and hope you don't hurt them. Because that's what black folks, Latinx folks, they send them in, their little, backpack and all the stuff, and they hope. I just hope you're not going to hurt them. I don't hope. I go in, I say, hello, Miss Wilson, I understand you're going to be my grandson's teacher. I want to know how you're going to mitigate any potential harm to him as a result of implicit bias. I don't understand what you're saying. Well, here's some data. Let me give it to you because I want you to have it. Now, I want you to read it. Now that you have it, I want to know how you're going to mitigate any potential harm to him or anyone that looks like him as a result of implicit bias. Well, I'm not a racist. Here's some information that suggests you might not know. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to err in the direction of the most vulnerable, which are these children. So I'm going to need you to give me something better than I'm a nice person. Because I have what they call a preponderance of evidence that suggests that you may not know, and the one mostly harmed are these children. I arm parents with that information. Do you hear what I'm saying? Not just Dr. Joy. Joy gives them the data and says, now we can hold you accountable because you know. But those are the kind of things that I think we start talking about advocacy. We have to show up. We've got to work in the institutions. And someone asked me earlier, Dr. Joy, how do you deal with this when we're still under assault? So you're breaking my leg and you're complaining that I limp. So what I got to do is I got to stop you from breaking my leg on one end. I got to heal those that have broken legs and prevent further harm and change the trajectory of our growth on the other end. That is that long game. That is that sustained information where I'm not asking you, I'm demanding it. But we have to show up in those spaces on the ground. That's my point. It's not only, all of us need to show up, and you would never know how powerful parents can be when they find out they have power and they have a voice and they have the narrative. And you're not going to call us a subgroup. Think about this the way a subgroup, underprivileged. Everything is less than. We got to change the language, and we have to insist upon it, not with our emotional content, but with the data. They love data. I love data. Well, I give it to them, but I hold you accountable for that data. Everybody is so happy to acknowledge all the crazy stuff going on. I'm going, well, where's the accountability? They still shooting, killing us, and kicking our kids out of school with 3. Where's accountability? We find the data, we insist upon that accountability, and at the same time we begin to build our own systems like the Standalone Mental Health Center, Standalone. We can do it. We have the ability to do that. We just have to believe that. Okay, where we at now?
So now we're going to open up to some of the attendees here who are engaged in the advocacy space. We're going to start off with Robin Rue, who led the first American municipal-wide reparations initiative in America. And then we'll go to Jefta, who just want to, if you want to highlight a particular challenge that you would want us to speak to. And you can also speak to anything else that you've heard today. If you're in the advocacy space and you want to have any questions around that. But Robin, if you want.
Thank you. So you want to know the challenges that we're seeing in municipal?
Challenges or opportunities?
Well, the opportunity is great. Right now, not just Evanston, so many other communities have taken these steps of repair from a municipal position, acknowledging that it is not in any way to replace a federal policy or HR 40, but digging into the history of their municipality to take a step towards repair. So we're seeing great momentum there. Some of the opportunities and challenges that I'm seeing is communities need more support with public education on reparations, what reparations is, how it's different than equity and other forms of ordinary public policy, the history of reparations, that it's not novel, it's not a new concept, what attempts have been made, what we can build on. And so in my experience in 2019, having introduced it in February 2019, at that point, I had to sort of pull together references and sort of curate some education for my community. It was the cost of segregation report that was done by the Metropolitan Planning Council, Ta-Nehisi Coates' case for reparations. Later that year, Nicole's project came out, the 1619 project. Fortunately, I was able to meet NARC and later in COBRA, and so those institutions were able to come in and help support public education, but that's the need that I'm seeing right now for municipalities, because I saw that my colleagues on City Council, even great Black leaders, when we had closed session training on equity, weren't even aware of the disparities in the GI Bill being rolled out. They didn't know redlining in our own city. And so I see that as a need if institutions and educators want to serve the municipal space. That's an immediate need. Then the other immediate need is just political education, strategy, acumen, understanding a legislative process, one that is viable, one that can have funding that's beyond ceremony and apology. So there needs to be more education on political process, legislative process, the possibilities that could most likely come from legal experts as well as savvy, experienced political leaders, because there is the will and the appetite, there is the enthusiasm from local elected leaders to take these steps, but there is not enough support. And there are some of us that are in that space now working on local initiatives, but the demand is beyond our capacity. So one way that the sort of global community working on reparations could provide more education, background on reparations in a more sort of packaged way that is for specific forms of reparations.
Brother Jefta, and then Sister Miriam, and I see you, Sister.
Yeah, I think I asked my question earlier, and from the Namibian perspective, I have to tell you that Namibia is so small that we lack the skills and capacity to engage at equal level with this restitution and return of artifacts from Germany to Namibia. And there is, it's becoming now a profession for these museum people to, about the return of artifacts. It's like a money-making institution, and it's not really returning them because it's a process that is taking 2-3 years. And the terms of return are not written by us, and they are not shared by the government as to what is being returned and why is it being returned and what is being withheld and why. So I was talking to you to talk about this because it's an area that we really need to develop because there is an interest in return, but the modalities of returning those objects or human remains we lack it. Currently we have discovered they have like 13 or so human remains in the museum in New York from the Ovaherero and Nama people. And basically the people said, like, we don't engage with the affected community, we only work with the government, but the government is just silent on that. So I would like us to develop to help us, even everybody in the room here who have the capacity or who have dealt with these issues, to help develop a framework of advocacy or even to help others who are dealing with that in Namibia, like this is what you have to do when you're negotiating. Because we just sometimes fool ourselves that we are capable. We are capable of demanding, but we are not capable of engaging this complex conversation about provenance research. We don't know what that is all about. And because the Germans are really good at playing with the words. So I will ask you guys to reconsider in your framework or policy that you're going to develop that has to be highlighted because it's unequal for a small country to engage with this advanced country. They have been keeping this stuff for 100 years and they're returning it tomorrow and they want you to be prepared for that. So it's unfair. That's all, whatever.
One of the things that I mentioned the other day was this whole idea around a presentment. And a presentment is a document in commercial law that lays forth particular claims or offenses in criminal law. It lays forth the offenses of an entity or person and then indicates what will satisfy those offenses, what will satisfy that claim. And it generally requires a response by the person or corporation or entity that is given that presentment. And as I stated, we in America, I've used that model several times, one against a railroad that had enslaved our ancestors for 30 years or used enslaved labor for 30 years and then convict leasing labor for another 60 years. Used that model against the University Hospital that during the period of apartheid in America, they robbed African graves to attract medical students. to experiment on them so they could attract medical students. And so we presented them with one of these documents. And the power of the document is it's a mobilizing tool, because you lay out specifically the crimes that the entity has committed, how those crimes affect your community, your community at this particular period of time, and then what specifically you want them to redress. And so it's a short document, it's a mobilizing document, it's a teaching document, and it, like I said, generally requires a response. Once you develop your presentment, whatever it is, once you develop your presentment, and it's a legal document. So once you develop your presentment, then you rally some legal forces behind you. In your case, it would be around international, those who are familiar with international law. And there are several organizations that have global reach that are not just to a particular area. And so you want to reach out to those organizations, and we can kind of connect later on that. But the use of a presentment is a model that we're trying to push. And again, it's the one that we use with the Vatican, and we've gotten an initial response. But it's a long-term game. You know, as my brother stated, it's not something that's going to happen immediately, as you already know. My sister.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to highlight a little bit of work that we're doing in our little small town of Durham, North Carolina. The first thing I want to say is that, yes, the journey is very long. So we started, you know, at least, 15 years ago, really bringing up this conversation around, they like the word equity a lot, so around racial equity or disparities. And we started with disparities in policing, and we're able to prove, and police stops, and we're able to prove the disparities in police stops. We did over took us about 2-3 years before we got policies adopted from our city council, who actually declared that the police department was racist. After we did that work with a lot of community education, the police chief was asked to quit because he called us mothers of criminals who were sitting at Church's Chicken just complaining about their sons being arrested. He lost his job. But we did that work. But in addition to, we had to stay the course. From that, the city created a racial equity commission. There were a lot of other policy changes. They created a racial equity task force, And people think that that's not really worth anything, but it depends on who's the task force. So they did over 18 months worth of work. They came out with recommendations. Then the organizing happens. We made the demands that the recommendations be followed. Of course, that didn't happen. Well, the co-facilitator of the task force is now the mayor, because she ran for office when she could see that no one was going to be doing what they asked. She's got 2 years, because folks don't like her being in office demanding that the changes be made. Now fast forward also to ARPA. So we have the American Rescue Plan Act, which the Biden administration has given money to municipalities in order to, because of COVID. In the ARPA Act, it is specifically written that money be given to organizations and businesses that do not normally get funded. Municipalities are giving it to the police department, they're giving it to, the same entities. Black people have to demand that money. So we have a coalition of black businesses, an organization called Back in the Black, because we are saying, again, the GI Bill, redlining, we can name all the ways that black people in our community lost or not. In the GI Bill, folk don't understand that it's specifically written so that black people did not get money. And so what we are saying is, here again is the largest pot of money that the federal government is giving to municipalities. We know that you intentionally left us out in the GI Bill. We will not let you leave us out in ARPA. So we demanded 45% of those funds to go to black businesses and organizations. Of course, we haven't gotten that, but they're very angry with us. and both in our city and our county level, and the demand is continuing to be there. So we are demanding, because the Durham is 38% black-owned businesses, and so in order for there to be equity and not just equality, 38% isn't going to get it for us. In order for equity to happen, it is 45% that we need. So we've been asking people to look at, because I think just about every municipality got some money. You need to look at what they got, how it's being spent, what are the black businesses, what are the atrocities, what are the crimes in your community that can be rectified through this money that has come from the federal government, where it is written that this money should go to people, to policies and businesses that do not normally get funded. So we're also working with folks in Montgomery right now, because we've definitely presented across the South what we've been doing. So there are a couple of municipalities who have come and asked us for some help. And so folks are knocking down the doors in their city council meetings and asking about where the money is being spent, and what they need to be able to gain access to those funds. And there are a couple of municipalities around the country who are using it towards reparations in different things, housing. A lot of it has been around housing, but we have been demanding that the money go directly into the hands of the people. And so, we're working with organizations. They did an RFP process, which of course, most of our organizations were not able to, didn't have the infrastructure. So we said, you need to pay for someone to work with our organizations who don't have the infrastructure to meet your criteria. We're not gonna just sit back for that. And right, and because, if you weren't, not being insurable was only one thing, but a lot of things were that you didn't have the infrastructure. And so we're saying, pay for these organizations to do what they need to do to be able to have the infrastructure to apply for this money that is ours.
Shay, Lillian, and then Dr. Grills.
Thank you very much. I would like to talk about another aspect of advocacy a little bit. So we've not discussed about this a lot in the past 3 days, but what I'd like to highlight on is that we really need to heavily invest in youths, in adolescents and children, because they are the new generations who are going to continue the advocacy work that we've been doing. And as we talk about our past and fight for justice, of course, not just for ourselves, for the ancestors, but also for the generations coming after us, we also have to put, I think, equally as much effort into what will become of these children and youth. How will they grow up? What kind of environment will they be able to do their advocacy job? Because of course we don't have to be living in an illusion that after this summit things are going to change and our children won't have struggles and wars to fight. So they do have the capacity to do it, but we must give them the tools for self-empowerment, to know who they are, where they come from. And of course, they have to know our stories. They have to know the truth, because as Dr. Joy also mentioned it, lies only destroy things. So we have to let our children know the bitter truth about what happened to our ancestors, how our brothers and sisters are being brutalized, mistreated, discriminated against, and murdered day by day. But they also have to learn about the bright side of our lives, our culture, our values. And it's very important for their self-empowerment, for them to have that knowledge, that awareness of both sides, both the pain, the extreme pain, but also the extreme happiness that comes out of our heritage. And education in its several forms is so important. So as we are fighting for the history books to be changed, rewritten, for history to be taught as it was, so that no one, for example, in the South will believe that it was actually the southern states that won the Civil War, as it is still happening today, because the history books are teaching so many lies to that extent. But also giving the kind of education, empowering with the multiple literacies. And I personally, and I know that none of you wish to teach our children the coping mechanisms that our parents and grandparents have been doing and we are doing. I don't want to have to tell my children how to dress and behave, how not to go out in the evening wearing a hoodie. I don't want to teach them how to behave if the police stops them, how to obey, how to respond. No, I want to refuse to do that. I want to teach them how to be able to live a life full of dignity, that we do have the right as human beings, just ordinary human beings, not more, not less than others, just to live, just to be left alone, to do what we want. If we want to destroy our own future as individuals, we have the right to do that. And if we want to strive, we should have the right to strive. So that's what I want to teach my children, and not how to survive, not how to just exist, but how to live. Because we do have the right to live. We have the right to experience joy the way we want to, the way we know how we can. I want our children to have their rights to childhood instead of learning all these coping mechanisms from as young as they can walk. And there's just one little story I would like to share with you from yesterday. So when we went to Cape Coast, and of course I didn't hear new things, but just the spirit, the energies, those extremely painful and unbearable energies that I experienced. I was speechless. I didn't want us to leave. I just wanted to sit there for a few hours and mourn. And then suddenly something extraordinary happened. Jasmine's son wanted to run around, and he just started running there in Cape Coast at the top. He was just running, he's 1 year old, taking the first few steps. And I was thinking about that. Yeah, all the pain, all the suffering, everything that our people, our ancestors have gone through in 400 years, everything we are experiencing, that they are watching and smiling at us, because there's this little life just learning about what's around him, not knowing anything about the place. And he was just running there freely, completely freely and happily, full of joy, laughing. And that touched me so deeply, that whatever happened, all the pains, it just, that joy of hope for the future just overrides all the pain.
Well, thank you for that. I think that, one, I don't see a dichotomy. I think we have to trust in God and tie the camel. And that means that, you know, our children who are born free and innocent, that see joy and love and beauty. I mean, even during slavery, you know, children played. There was always hope, and we would not be here in this room were there not hope and love and joy. So no, by no means do we want to pass along our trauma, if you will. However, our children are going to have to navigate spaces that are hostile towards them. And I think we do a disservice if we don't prepare them in terms of walking into those systems. And because I've been involved in them, all of them, and more specifically in the criminal justice system, working in prisons, I really feel like I understand, and having even family engaged in those systems, that we need to make certain that they walk that mystical path with practical feet, that they're able to garner whatever they need to navigate spaces that are different even from what we're experiencing. I mean, what our kids are being faced with all over is this level of anti-blackness that we have to buttress them. We have to strengthen them. That does not mean that we overload them with the negatives. I don't believe that at all. But I also feel very strongly, both as a clinician, as a mother, as a grandmother, that we have to also embrace them and protect them. Leaves me with two things that I think we need to do that came out of this meeting. One was a brother that talked about Namibia being in a small space. We need resource lists. We need a go-to place. We need we really need to have a space where we know how to access our human resources around the world. We don't all have the tools, but we do all have the tools collectively. And what you don't have there, for example, when you get back that stolen cultural reality that sustains us, that you need to have a place to put it. That was one of the questions I think you put forth, is when they're talking about giving it back, they're talking about things like permanent loan. They're talking about, do you know how to take care of the things once we give them to you? I'm listening to all that, and I'm thinking of names of people that pop up that have that expertise where you don't have it. So that local context, what was happening in Evanston, and dealing with the fact that the very people we're trying to help don't know what it is that's going on, and often push back out of ignorance. So yes, we need that, but we definitely need a global resource list, if you will, so we can look at our village and say, who in our village has this skill? Who in our village, not mine, because my local context is different from everyone else's, but clearly we have the world at in our midst of our people, of our global village. And sometimes, I think we feel ourselves stuck and kind of functioning alone in our silos. But after being here, after being at Bellagio, I'm calling on my village. I'm calling on my village. I don't have the tools that folks have here. And I'm sure they will call upon me where I can be used. But I think we have to start looking at it like that we're not working just in our silos. We are a collective entity. And to keep thinking about that as a global community as it relates to reparations. Where you don't have it, let's try to find it for you. I mean, we do that as in health all the time. People say, hey, my son is acting up. I live in, over in the Massachusetts area, and his dad is gone. I call my friend. I say, Robert, listen, I need you to be father in that village. I need you to be father, because father's not there. And guess what? He showed up. And so that's something that we have to begin to do with one another, is to create, like I said, I think a global resource list.
Hello.
My sister.
I wanted to respond to your question or your request, Cam, about naming struggles and opportunities. And I want to answer that from the perspective of being one of the 9-person member California Reparations Task Force, but also from the perspective of being a clinical psychologist and a past president of the Association of Black Psychologists, and finally as a researcher doing research on mental health approaches in California and across the country. So I'll make this brief. In terms of the struggles, I wanted to name 2 in particular. There are more, but these 2 in particular. First struggle is the organized, highly organized, and unclear as to the resources, the source of the resources to entities like ADOS and ADOS-like organizations and groups that are pretending to be representatives of the Black community, but who are in fact dissuading, decreasing members of the Black community to participate in the discourse in our reparations hearings because of the way in which, the particularly toxic way in which they engage, and the loose affiliation with facts and truth, the Trumpian style of engagement. And so that has been a challenge, a real threat and a challenge, in my perspective, to the California Reparations Task Force's work. The second challenge is the assumption by some that lineage-based approaches or a lineage-based approach will stand a greater chance of survival to a challenge to reparations at the level of the Supreme Court. I don't know why one would think, particularly the current Supreme Court in the United States, no matter what reparations is defined as, no matter what framework, that they would somehow operate in a way that reflects justice is blind. On to the opportunities. I see many opportunities, and I just want to name a few of them. First opportunity is that some have argued that it doesn't make sense to do local reparations efforts, like at a city or a state level, that the only real reparations can happen at the federal or national level. I believe that there's an incredible power in the uncovering of the harms at the local level. It begins to seed the process of truth and reconciliation. It begins to expose the breadth and depth of the harms. And so I am encouraging local and national at the same time. I think there's power in that. Secondly, engaging Black community-based organizations that are doing community organizing work is incredibly important. It took a minute to convince some of these organizations that reparations work was directly relevant to their campaigns for social justice, but now I'm seeing more and more of these organizations embracing reparations as central to their own work, their own campaigns. And I think that that is going to be one way to offset the challenge that I mentioned earlier with respect to ADOS and ADOS-like efforts. Third, social justice work. No, let me leave that. I'll go on to another one. Allies like the Japanese American community are stepping up in some incredible ways. The first organization or entity to sign off on, to endorse the California Reparations Task Force's interim report was the Japanese American Bar Association. First, it wasn't a black, I couldn't get national black organizations to even return my emails saying, will you endorse this report? Will you spread the word? Would you form study groups? So I think we need to also look carefully at how to use, in a positive and constructive way, our allies. Because at the end of the day, reparations is not going to make it in the United States without the help of allies. There's not enough of us to carry the necessary votes at the local or national level, to influence elected officials at the level that's going to be necessary. Another opportunity is the mounting evidence for culturally grounded mental health prevention, early intervention, and treatment. So I am leading a research team that has been for the last 5 years doing the research to determine the effectiveness of community-defined evidence practices. And this is the California Reducing Disparities Project. 35 communities across the state of California doing anything but evidence-based practices, which is another assault on us and our mental health. And we have the evidence now to begin to argue the point that we do need somebody that looks like us across from the table. We do need somebody who understands our cultural framing and worldview and that understands our historical reality. And not only that, because not only are they influenced by data, these folks are influenced by the bottom line dollar figure, and we have strong evidence for the return on investment, that it is in fact cost effective to use community-based approaches to mental health. Lastly, or second to last, this is really quick, the American Psychological Association issued an apology for its contribution to the oppression of people of color, including black folk. We in the Association of Black Psychologists had a lot of problems with their apology. But that being said, there's an opportunity there. Because put your money where your mouth is, APA. If you really feel like you've colluded with racism and our oppression, then we want you to actually add a new category in the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, that interrogates the psychopathology of white racism. We want you to put a diagnosis in there about you. That's right? And we want you to come up with a treatment intervention for you. Because the truth be told, until they do their work, there will always be a threat to the integrity of our well-being. And then lastly, I will say that the global Pan-African movement has just finalized and received the necessary approvals and updated its memorandum of understanding with the AU to host the official 8th Pan-African Congress that will be held in Uganda in the first quarter of 2024. Reparations is going to be one of the issues front and center in that Congress. This conversation can be continued in a very substantive way. We're hoping to get at least 22,000 people from around the global African village in there and that discussion. I hope that we will be able to continue this conversation and take it to the next level of global inclusion and involvement.
I think we may have to end there unless there's one other quick comment. Okay, I want to thank everybody for sitting into this last session. It's been a very, very long day. And tomorrow, we're going to bring Mike Mead up to let us know about what's going on tomorrow, and we should have a draft tomorrow of a outcome document of the conference, of the summit, and we will be looking for everyone to have input in that draft before it becomes a final document. So, Mike Mead. Sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's okay. The photographers, you have to capture, please. I know that it's been a long day. Love to Brother Cam and Dr. Joyce. Some love. That's the only time that Thank you. Thank you. Please. This is the first conference where I've not heard a song in the, except Tar sang, right? It's a recital. A song, a slogan, or money. So tomorrow, please, Kumba Ture, all those great Doans in arts and culture who are in the room, or Dons. So I'm going to request you to do something. Please, as you walk out, remember to get your COVID test for tomorrow. You can do it this morning. Sorry, you did already. Yeah, but you'll have to test again tomorrow. Remember, it's 24 hours. You are not going to get COVID tonight. Tomorrow, because you're going out, it's optional. Excuse me. For those who require COVID tests for travel, when you're not traveling tomorrow, please remember that I am just sharing a trick with you. Because tomorrow it's optional and we're out in the field. It may be easier for you to do one later today if they haven't closed. They're closed, okay. But so you have to do it tomorrow morning. You're leaving at 6, yeah, tomorrow morning. The reason why I took the microphone, I wanted to say my goodbyes. It's been a pleasure being with you all. I will leave tomorrow. I have missed the 2 opportunities, but I wanted to thank you for your generosity, for your kindness, for your tolerance, for your patience. And for those who like free drinks, I'm going to gather 2 of my friends to buy drinks if you find where people drink. And if you like stories, we will have a stories circle. And if you like Ghanaian food, we will try and get Macmead to get us to Buka for Ghanaian food. So see you later. God bless you. I'm hosting. Macmead and I have agreed that what we will do before the Uganda Pan-African Congress, my sister, we actually are going to try and get together to get some quick resolutions to onboard the type of people who might not make it to Kampala or who might not come to Kampala. Thank you so much. Thank you, MacArthur. Thank you, Wellsprings. Thank you for your kindness.
Please, thank you to Mr. Brian Kagoro. Please join me in thanking Mr. Kagoro, my elder brother.